The Hall of Judgment within the Orion Concord was not designed for justice. It was designed for vertigo. Lyra Soren stood at the center of a floor made of polished obsidian, a black mirror that reflected the galaxy spinning in holographic projections above her head. The ceiling was a dome of artificial night, vast and suffocating, where constellations were rearranged to suit the aesthetic preferences of the current administration. Floating banners of silk and starlight hung motionless in the recycled air, bearing the crests of the 12 high counselors who sat upon a raised dais, peering down at her like vultures deciding which part of the carcass to pick first. Lyra smoothed the fabric of her ceremonial gown. It was a deep, iridescent violet, the color of a bruised twilight, chosen specifically because it clashed with the severe gray tones of the courtroom. If she was going to be executed or exiled, she refused to coordinate with the furniture. She watched the proceedings with the detached curiosity of a critic watching a play where the actors had forgotten their lines but refused to leave the stage. The trial was theater. It was a farce so expensive that it almost demanded applause. Above her, a holographic projection of a witness she had never met was testifying to a crime she had never committed. The man, a dock worker with nervous eyes and a scripted stammer, claimed he had seen Lyra handing over encryption keys to a radical separatist group in the lower sectors of the capital. Lyra tilted her head, observing the timestamp on the projection. It had been altered. The shadows in the footage fell to the left, implying morning light, yet the timestamp read 2200 hours. Amateur work. They had edited the witnesses, cut her own recorded words into jagged weapons, and pasted them into a narrative of treason that was as flimsy as wet paper. But in the Orion Concord, truth was merely a subscription service Lyra could no longer afford. The projection faded, dissolving into static before vanishing. High Counselor Vane, a man whose skin looked like parchment stretched over a skull, leaned forward. His voice was amplified by the acoustics of the dome, booming like a god with a sinus infection. "Lady Lyra Soren," he said, "the evidence is substantial. You have conspired to destabilize the economic solidity of the Concord. You have traded state secrets for personal leverage. How do you plead?" Lyra looked up. She did not tremble. She did not cry. She simply smiled, a small, sharp expression that did not reach her eyes. "I plead boredom." "Counselor," Lyra said, her voice clear and carrying to the back of the silent hall. "If you are going to frame me for treason, at least have the decency to make the fictional version of me interesting. I would never meet a contact in a cargo bay. It smells of ozone and desperation. I would have chosen a restaurant, somewhere with decent wine." A ripple of murmurs went through the gallery. Vane narrowed his eyes. "Insolence will not help your case." Another voice cut in. It was Counselor Kalen. He sat 2 seats to the right of Vane, young for a counselor, handsome in a way that suggested he spent more time in front of a mirror than reading legislation. He was the one who had orchestrated this. Lyra knew it. She had found the financial discrepancies in his sector reports, funds siphoned off to unsanctioned bio-research facilities on the rim. And 2 days later, she was in chains. Kalen smiled at her, a gesture that looked warm to the cameras but felt like ice to Lyra. "Let us not be too harsh on her," Kalen said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "Lady Soren has always been a creature of whimsy. Perhaps she did not understand the gravity of her actions. She is, after all, too charming to be dangerous." Lyra felt a cold spike of rage in her gut. She recognized the tactic instantly. It was the oldest move in the political playbook. Dismiss the woman, reduce her to a pretty harmless thing who stumbled into trouble, then bury her while everyone is still smiling at her naivety. If they painted her as a mastermind, she became a martyr. If they painted her as a foolish girl, she became a footnote. "I am not charming," Lyra said, her voice dropping an octave, losing its playfulness. "And I am very, very dangerous to men who think accounts can be hidden in subledgers." Kalen ignored her. He turned to Vane. "I propose we forgo the capital punishment," Kalen suggested. "It seems excessive for a crime of confusion. Instead, I suggest rehabilitation through service. Or rather, removal to a place where she can do no harm." Vane nodded slowly, as if this had not been rehearsed in a private dining room 3 hours ago. "Agreed," Vane said. "Lyra Soren, this council sentences you to permanent exile. You will be transported immediately to the planetary system of Karen 9. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the air recyclers seemed to pause. Karen 9. The name was a ghost story. It was a planet on the outer rim, a world shrouded in perpetual hyperstorms and biological madness. It was not a prison colony. Prison colonies had walls and guards. Karen 9 had weather that could shred a hull in seconds and an ecosystem that rewrote biology like a cruel joke. It was a no-return designation. "You are sentencing me to death," Lyra said, her voice steady. "You are just too cowardly to pull the trigger yourselves. You will be provided with standard survival supplies," Vane continued, ignoring her, "and to ensure the security of the Concorde. Your vessel will be outfitted with a localized dampening field. No outgoing communication will be permitted. You will fade. Lady Soren, that is your sentence." Silence. 2 guards in pristine white armor stepped forward, grabbing her arms. Lyra did not struggle. She held her head high, the jewels in her hair catching the artificial starlight one last time. As they marched her out of the hall, she locked eyes with Kalen. He raised a glass of water to his lips, hiding a smirk. He thought he had won. He thought he was throwing a piece of refuse into a black hole. He had no idea what he was sending into the dark. The starport was a cathedral of glass and steel, vibrating with the subsonic hum of engines. Lyra was escorted down a restricted maintenance corridor, away from the civilian terminals where travelers laughed and hugged and complained about luggage fees. Here, the air smelled of hydraulic fluid and ozone. The dropship awaited her at the end of Docking Bay 4. It was an ugly thing, a rusted iron teardrop scarred by atmospheric burns, looking more like a coffin than a vessel. Technicians were loading supplies into the cargo hold with the indifferent efficiency of men who did not care if the cargo arrived intact. Lyra halted. The guard on her right shoved her forward, but she dug her heels in. "Move," the guard grunted. "Wait," Lyra said. Her eyes were locked on a crate being levitated into the hold by a grav loader. It was not one of her survival crates. It was sleek, reinforced with heavy polymer weaving, and sealed with a magnetic lock that glowed with a dull red pulse. On the side of the crate, stenciled in stark black paint, was a symbol she recognized from her days studying obscure hazardous material protocols. A biohazard sigil, 3 interlocking circles with a serrated edge. But beneath it, stamped in a metallic ink that caught the harsh overhead lights, was the private crest of the High Council. A crest that was only used for direct revenue streams. Lyra's mind raced. Why send a biohazard crate to a dead world? If Karen 9 was just a graveyard for political enemies, why were they shipping high-level containment units down to the surface? And then it clicked. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The Exile program. It was not just a disposal method, it was a cover. They were not just sending people to die, they were sending something else down there. Or perhaps they were harvesting something. The planet was not a garbage dump. It was a factory, and the exiles were just the excuse to keep the shipping lanes open. "Keep moving," the guard snapped, activating the shock baton in his hand. Lyra allowed herself to be pushed forward, but she filed the image of that crate away in the drawer of her mind labeled revenge. She climbed the ramp into the dropship, the smell of stale air and unwashed metal assaulting her nose. They strapped her into the pilot's seat, a formality, as the ship was on autopilot. The harness dug into her shoulders. The cockpit was a cramped cage of blinking lights and dirty screens. The hatch hissed shut, sealing her in. The silence of the vacuum pressed against the hull. A robotic voice, cheerful and utterly devoid of soul, filled the small space. Destination confirmed. Karen 9. Estimated travel time, 4 hours. Please enjoy your flight. Lyra laughed. It was a dry, jagged sound. She leaned her head back against the headrest and closed her eyes as the engines roared to life, a vibration that rattled her teeth. "Enjoy the flight," she whispered to the empty cabin. "Of course. I always enjoy flying into a grave." The descent was not a flight. It was an execution. The dropship hit the upper atmosphere of Karen 9 like a stone skipping across a lake of fire. The turbulence was immediate and violent. The ship groaned, metal screaming under the stress of re-entry. Lyra gripped the armrests until her knuckles turned white. On the main view screen, the sky outside was not black or blue. It was a violent, bruising ultraviolet, a color that seemed to vibrate with malice. Clouds the size of continents swirled in patterns that defied meteorology, looking less like weather and more like living bruises on the face of the planet. Warning, the computer chirped, hull integrity at 60%, atmospheric shear exceeding safety limits. Lightning did not strike down on Karen 9. It crawled sideways. Great jagged forks of plasma spiderwebbed across the viewport, illuminating the storm in strobe light flashes of blinding white. The ship lurched, flipping almost upside down. The artificial gravity compensators whined and failed, slamming Lyra against her harness. Debris from the cabin, a loose stylus, a data pad became deadly projectiles, smashing against the reinforced glass. Warning, thruster malfunction in Sector 4, impact imminent. The clouds parted for a second, revealing the world below. It looked like an ocean made of black glass, slick and undulating, shrouded in a fog that seemed to breathe. Jagged spires of rock pierced through the mist like the ribcage of some buried titan. There were no green forests, no blue waters. Everything was shades of charcoal, indigo, and a glowing toxic bioluminescence. Brace for impact, the computer advised politely. Lyra didn't scream. She didn't pray. She simply gritted her teeth and thought, "If I die, Kalen wins." I refuse to let that man win. The ground rushed up to meet them. The ship clipped the top of a stone spire, spinning wildly. The world became a blur of motion and noise, the screech of tearing metal, the roar of engines dying, the explosion of the landing struts shattering. Then, darkness. She woke to the sound of water and the smell of ozone. Lyra gasped, her lungs seizing as she tried to inhale. The air was thick, heavy, and tasted distinctively metallic, like sucking on a copper coin. She was hanging sideways in her harness. The cockpit tilted at a precarious angle. The windshield was shattered. The humid alien air was drifting in, carrying wisps of purple fog. Lyra fumbled with the buckle of her harness. Her fingers were numb, and her left shoulder throbbed with a dull, sickening ache. With a sharp click, the buckle released, and she tumbled down to the side of the cockpit, landing in a pile of shattered glass and wire. She groaned, pushing herself up. Her violet gown was torn at the hem. stained with hydraulic fluid and her own blood. She checked her limbs, bruised, battered, but unbroken. She crawled through the broken windshield and fell onto the ground. She was in a river valley, though it looked nothing like the valleys of her home world. The ground was soft, spongy, covered in a carpet of moss that was a deep, velvety black. The river that cut through the center of the valley did not flow with clear water. It flowed with a liquid that glowed faintly, a milky opalescence that cast eerie shadows on the canyon walls. The stones on the riverbank were pulsing. Lyra blinked, thinking it was a concussion. She stared at a gray boulder near her hand. It expanded and contracted rhythmically, a slow, geological heartbeat. It was emitting a low hum, a vibration she could feel in her teeth. She scrambled back, her boots slipping on the black moss. "Alive," she whispered. "The whole place is alive." She looked back at the wreckage of her ship. It was a smoking ruin, half buried in the side of a cliff. It looked like a crushed soda can, and there was no way to fly it again. She was stranded, alone, on a planet designed to kill her. Lyra Soren, daughter of the high houses, looked at her hands. They were dirty. Her nails were chipped. "Well," she said aloud, her voice raspy. "Step 1. Do not die." She forced herself to stand. Pain flared in her side, but she ignored it. She climbed back into the wreckage, careful of the jagged metal. She needed supplies. The cargo hold was crushed, but she managed to pry open the emergency locker. It was meager, a survival kit. She pulled out the contents, laying them on the moss. Item 1, a compact heat blade. The handle was cracked, but the blade hummed to life with a glowing orange edge when she activated it. Good. Item 2, a med patch. The indicator light was blinking red, meaning the nanites inside were failing. It might seal a wound, but it would not fix a broken bone or cure a poison. Item 3, a Nutrisynth unit. Lyra picked up the small gray box. It was designed to pull moisture and carbon from the air and reconstitute it into an edible, nutrient-rich paste. It was the standard ration for soldiers and refugees. She pressed the activation button. The machine wheezed, rattled, and spat out a glob of gray sludge into her hand. It looked like wet cement and smelled like despair. Lyra tasted a tiny amount. She gagged. It was flavorless, textureless, a void of culinary existence. It was calories. Yes, it would keep her body running, but it was not food. It was fuel for a machine, and it made her soul shrivel. She wiped her mouth, looking at the gray sludge with genuine offense. "I am not eating this," she declared to the empty valley. "I would rather starve than die with the taste of wet cardboard in my mouth." She packed the items into a salvaged rucksack. She had a knife. She had a bandage. She had a machine that made sadness. It was enough to live. It was not enough to feel human. Night fell on Karen 9 not by the setting of a sun, but by the rising of the biosphere. As the ultraviolet light of the sky faded into a deep, bruising indigo, the planet woke up. The silence of the day was replaced by a symphony of alien noise. The wind picked up, howling through the stone spires, but it didn't sound like wind. It sounded like distant, metallic laughter. It scraped against the rocks, creating harmonies that were haunting and beautiful and terrifying. Lyra sat with her back against the wreckage of the ship, shivering. The temperature had dropped, and the fog was thickening. Then, the lights appeared. A swarm of insects, each the size of a tea saucer, drifted out of the river reeds. They were bioluminescent, glowing with soft hues of amber and teal. They didn't buzz, they hummed. Lyra tensed as one drifted toward her. It landed on her hand. She flinched, expecting a sting, a bite, acid. Instead, the creature felt warm. It vibrated against her skin, leaving a trail of harmless golden sparks that faded after a few seconds. It was a little living heater. She watched it crawl over her knuckles, fascinated. The planet was brutal, yes, the storms were violent. But this was gentle. She looked around. The black moss was glowing now, too. Faint veins of silver light running through the ground. The pulsing stones were syncing their rhythm with the humming of the insects. It was a language, she realized. The planet was talking to itself. Her stomach growled, a loud, demanding sound that cut through the alien symphony. The Nutrisynth paste was still in her bag, unappealing and gray. She looked at the riverbank. Strange. Bulbous fungi had pushed up through the moss since sunset. They were bright red, with gills that breathed slowly. Lyra stood up, walking toward them. "Everything is edible if you learn the language," she muttered, remembering a xenobotany lecture she had slept through in university. She knelt by the red fungus. She didn't touch it. She watched. A small, six-legged creature, something between a lizard and a rat, skittered out of the darkness. It approached the fungus, sniffed it, and then recoiled, sneezing violently. It scurried away. Not that one, Lyra noted. She moved to a cluster of twisted roots near the water. They were pale, looking like parsnips, but they vibrated when she reached for them. She took her heat blade and carefully sliced a thin shaving off the root. She touched it to the back of her wrist. The sensitive skin there would react to contact toxins. Nothing happened. No rash, no burning. She touched it to her lip. A sensation of numbness spread instantly, like ice water. It wasn't painful. It was calming. It dulled the throb in her shoulder. An anesthetic root, she thought. Useful. She continued her foraging, moving with a caution that felt foreign to her. She was a woman who ordered menus, not one who hunted ingredients. But hunger was a powerful tutor. She found a fruit hanging from a vine that looked like barbed wire. The fruit was blue, hard as a stone. She cracked it open with the hilt of her blade. Inside, the flesh was soft and smelled. Impossible. She sniffed it. It smelled like rain on hot asphalt. It smelled like old books. It smelled like a memory of a childhood she never had. She took a tiny bite. It was sweet, tart, and melancholic all at once. Safe, she decided. She gathered what she could, her pockets heavy with alien produce. As she turned back to the ship, her boot hit something hard in the mud. It wasn't a rock. It was a piece of metal, half buried. Lyra dug it out. It was a small black box, heavy and dense. She wiped the mud from the faceplate and saw the Council's seal. It was an emergency quantum seed transmitter. Every ship carried one. It was designed to survive total destruction and send a single, automated ping back to headquarters. Vessel lost. Crew deceased. It was a death certificate machine. Lyra turned it over in her hands. The indicator light was dead. The power cell was likely drained, or the system was locked down to prevent tampering. She sat on a flat rock, placing the transmitter on her lap. She pulled out her heat blade and used the tip to unscrew the casing. The circuitry inside was complex, a maze of optical fibers and crystalline processors. "You think you can keep me quiet?" Lyra whispered to the machine. "You think you can just mark me as dead and file the paperwork?" She began to work. She didn't have tools, she didn't have a manual, but Lyra Soren had spent her youth breaking into her father's encrypted accounts to fund her excursions to the lower city. She knew how data flowed. She knew that every lock had a key, and if you didn't have the key, you could just smash the door down. She rerouted the power from the transmitter's distress beacon to its data entry port. She bypassed the biometric lock by shorting the circuit with a spark from her heat blade. Sparks flew, singing her eyebrows. She laughed. Her lips were cracked. Her face was dirty, but she was laughing. The transmitter hummed. A small holographic interface flickered to life. It was unstable, blue light jittering in the darkness. System error. The text read, unauthorized access. Lyra tapped the interface. Override command, Soren Alpha 1. Access denied. She tried again. Override command, I am still here, you bastards. Access denied. She sighed, wiping a smear of blue fruit juice from her cheek. She needed to bypass the protocol entirely. She didn't need to send a distress signal. She needed to send data. She spent an hour rewiring the modulation unit, using a strip of wire from her damaged dress. Finally, the screen blinked green. Connection established. Bandwidth minimal. Quantum entanglement active. She had a line out, a tiny, fragile thread connecting her to the galaxy that had thrown her away. She needed shelter. The wreckage of the ship was unstable. The cliff above it groaned every time the wind hit. She walked further down the riverbank, guided by the light of the moons that were now rising. 3 of them, small and jagged, racing across the sky. She saw a shape in the distance. It looked like a cave, but as she got closer, the architecture was wrong. It was a stone outcrop shaped like a giant open mouth. The teeth were stalactites and stalagmites of crystalline growth that shimmered in the moonlight. Lyra approached it cautiously. She touched the wall of the cave. It wasn't cold stone. It was warm. It had a texture like coral. It's a reef, she realized. A dry land reef. The interior was spacious, protected from the wind. The floor was smooth and dry. The crystal growths along the walls emitted a soft, ambient light, enough to see by. She dropped her rucksack in the center of the space. It was absurd. It was terrifying. It was home. She looked around at the damp walls, the alien light, the sheer hopelessness of it all. And then, her defense mechanism kicked in. The armor she had worn in the high courts, the shield that had protected her from sneers and insults. Humor. Welcome, she announced to the empty cave, sweeping her arm in a grand gesture. Welcome to the no-return bistro. Table for one? Excellent choice. The ambiance is primitive chic, and the chef is currently hallucinating from oxygen deprivation. She gathered stones to build a fire circle. She found dry moss that burned with a clean white flame when she sparked it with her heat blade. She laid out her ingredients, the river mollusk she had found near the water. It was the size of her fist. Its shell spiraled and iridescent. The fern hearts, bitter and fibrous, stripped of their toxic outer leaves. The glowing pepper pod, bright orange and humming with energy. The blue fruit. She didn't just throw them into the fire. She couldn't. Cooking was civilization. Cooking was order. If she ate like an animal, she would become one. She used a flat piece of slate as a searing pan, heating it over the moss fire until it was smoking hot. She sliced the mollusk meat. It sizzled when it hit the stone, releasing a steam that smelled of brine and iron. She added the fern hearts, letting them char slightly to break down the bitterness. She crushed the pepper pod over the mixture, and the juices popped and hissed, releasing a scent that made her eyes water and her mouth salivate, a spicy electric aroma that cut through the metallic air. She plated it on a large, concave leaf. It looked distinct. The charred meat, the vibrant green of the ferns, the glowing orange dust of the pepper. It looked like a dish from an avant-garde restaurant in the capital. One of those places that charge 300 credits for a deconstructed concept. Lyra sat cross-legged on the floor of her living cave. She took a bite. The flavor exploded in her mouth. The mollusk was rich and savory, like a scallop but denser. The ferns added a crunch of earthiness. But the pepper was the star. It didn't just burn, it tingled. It felt like tiny static shocks dancing on her tongue, waking up nerves she didn't know she had. It was strange. It was alien. It was delicious. She closed her eyes, letting the heat of the food warm her from the inside out. "Take that. Nutrisynth," she whispered. She looked at the transmitter sitting on the rock beside her. The green light was still blinking, waiting for input. She had one shot. The energy cell was draining fast. She could send a plea for help. "Save me. I am here." But who would listen? The council would just delete it. Her friends, if she had any real friends, would think it was a cruel prank. No. A plea was weak. A plea was admitting they had won. She needed to send something else. Something they couldn't ignore. Something that would annoy them to their very core. She took her data pad, which had miraculously survived the crash with a cracked screen, and snapped a picture of her meal. The lighting from the crystals was perfect, casting dramatic shadows over the glowing food. It looked beautiful. It looked impossible. She linked the pad to the transmitter. She typed a caption. She didn't overthink it. She let the absurdity of the moment guide her fingers. They exiled her to a planet no one returned from. She sent back a food blog. She added a subheader, "Dish, seared Karen mollusk with electric pepper dust." Review, a bit chewy, but the tingling sensation makes you forget you are technically dead. 4 stars. She hovered her finger over the send button. This was madness. This was suicide. If they traced this, they would come back and finish the job. But the alternative was silence, and Lyra Soren had never been good at being quiet. She pressed send. The transmitter whined, a high-pitched frequency that made the crystals in the cave vibrate. A beam of cohesive energy shot up from the device, punching through the cave mouth, through the storm clouds, through the atmosphere, aiming for the nearest quantum relay buoy in the sector. The screen flashed. Upload complete. Then, the device sparked and died. The light went out. Lyra sat back, the darkness of the cave closing in slightly as the fire dimmed. The post was out there. It was traveling faster than light, bouncing through the void, heading for the neural nets of the Orion Concord. She waited. The wind howled outside, sounding like 1,000 ghosts screaming her name. The planet breathed beneath her. She held her breath, staring at the dead transmitter, wondering if the universe was laughing at her, or if, just maybe, it was waiting to see what she would cook next. The transmission hit the galactic net like a meteor striking a crowded city. It started on the fringe channels, the dark fiber networks where smugglers traded star charts and anarchists debated the philosophy of gravity. It was a single image, grainy but undeniable, followed by a caption that read like a punchline to a joke no one was brave enough to tell. They exiled her to a planet no one returned from. She sent back a food blog. Within 6 hours, the post had been mirrored, remixed, and translated into 400 languages. It appeared on the screens of bored freighter pilots in the deep void. It scrolled across the data pads of university students in the capital. It flickered onto the retinal displays of high society matrons who were desperate for a scandal to break the monotony of tea season. At first, the consensus was that it was a hoax, a very expensive, very elaborate piece of performance art. The atmosphere in the photo was too violet, the shadows too sharp, the plating of the charred mollusk too avant-garde. Then the data miners got involved. They stripped the file down to its raw code, looking for the forgery stamps. Instead, They found the atmospheric signature. Every planet in the galaxy leaves a unique radioactive fingerprint on a transmission, a background noise of isotopes and magnetic interference. The fingerprint on Lyra's blog post was chaotic, heavy with heavy metals and screaming with ionization. It matched only one location in the stellar charts, Charon 9, the graveyard world. The realization swept through the population like a fever. She was alive. The woman the High Council had erased with a gavel and a polite smile was not only breathing, she was critiquing the texture of alien seafood. Lyra, unaware of her new status as a digital deity, leaned into the role with the desperate energy of someone who knew that boredom was just as lethal as the atmosphere. She hacked the transmitter to allow for video, short bursts of data that she edited in camera with cinematic flair. Her second post was titled Storm-Fried Mycelium, a guide to breakfast in hell. The video opened with a shot of Lyra's face, smudged with soot but framed by hair that she had somehow managed to braid into an elegant crown. Behind her, a storm wall the size of a continent was tearing up the horizon, lightning crawling sideways across the sky. She held up a cluster of blue, trembling fungi. "The trick," she shouted over the roar of the wind, "is to harvest them right before the lightning strikes. The static charge makes the texture crispy. If you wait too long, they explode. If you harvest too early, they taste like wet socks." She turned, threw the fungi onto a heated slate rock, and ducked as a bolt of plasma arced over her head, frying the mushrooms instantly. She plated them with a flourish, garnishing the dish with a sprinkle of crystallized salt she had scraped from a cliff face. "Bon appétit," she said to the camera, winking. Or as we say here, try not to die. Her humor became the hook. It was sharp, jagged, and terrified of silence. She started reviewing her exile as if it were a disappointing vacation package. She rated the council's cruelty like a restaurant review. Service, hostile. She wrote in an overlay on a video of her dodging a rock slide. Ambiance, narcissistic and damp. Chef, corrupt, 1 star. Would not recommend. But the view is dramatic. In the capital city of the Orion Concord, the laughter was not shared. Jonah Reyes sat in a room that did not exist on any official blueprint. The walls were gray. The table was gray. The air smelled of scrubbed ozone and secrets. It was the Deep Intelligence Division of the High Council, a place where enthusiasm went to die. Jonah was a systems specialist, a title that meant he was paid to see patterns where others saw static. He was 34 years old, with tired eyes and hands that were steady only when he was working. He had a hidden past in the lower sectors, a childhood spent dismantling stolen tech to pay for food, which had left him with a lingering appreciation for how things were built and how to break them. On the wall in front of him, a dozen screens played Lyra Soren's videos on a loop. She was laughing in one, holding up a spiny fruit. She was cursing in another, trying to start a fire with damp moss. She looked wild, beautiful, and completely unmanageable. "Shut it down," the director said. The director was a woman who looked like she had been carved from marble and then left out in the rain. She stood behind Jonah, her reflection ghostly in the monitors. "It is a seed transmitter," Jonah said, his voice flat, military grade. "She has bypassed the encryption. If I just sever the connection, the signal will bounce. She will just find another relay, then find the source." The director snapped. "Trace the quantum entanglement back to the specific grid coordinates. We have a kill team on standby in orbit. They need a target." Jonah looked at the screen. Lyra was currently explaining how to debone a river eel that had 2 spines. She was making a joke about how the eel had more backbone than the Minister of Finance. "She is destabilizing the narrative," the director said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The populace thinks this is a game. They are laughing at us. Reyes, if they laugh, they do not fear. And if they do not fear, the Concord fractures. Find her. Silence her. Jonah nodded slowly. Understood. He was left alone in the room. He pulled his interface keyboard closer, his fingers hovering over the keys. He was supposed to be hunting a fugitive, then he was supposed to be dissecting a traitor. Instead, he found himself watching the videos again. He expected propaganda. He expected a weeping noblewoman begging for mercy, or a furious radical screaming manifestos. He did not expect this. He watched Lyra carefully slice a root vegetable that leaked purple sap. He watched her taste it, grimace, and then shrug. He saw the way she framed the shot, using the natural bioluminescence of the cave to create warmth in a world of cold shadows. She was turning misery into art. She was starving, freezing, and hunted, and she was choosing to make something beautiful out of it. Jonah felt a strange tightness in his chest. He hadn't cooked a real meal in 5 years, not since he took this job. He lived on ration bars and stimulants, but watching her, he remembered the smell of garlic hitting hot oil. He remembered the feeling of flour on his hands. He caught himself smiling at her eel joke. The smile felt foreign on his face, like a muscle he had forgotten how to use. He quickly wiped it away, glancing at the security camera in the corner of the room. He began to type, but he didn't initiate the kill trace. Not yet. He opened a back channel, a localized frequency that would mask his origin point, making it look like he was just another anonymous user on the galactic net. He needed to verify the signal, he told himself. He needed to engage the target to confirm she wasn't an AI simulation. He typed a message into the comment stream of her latest video. User, Gourmet Watcher 88. Comment. The heat distribution on that slate is uneven. You are going to burn the garlic moss before the eel is cooked. Try moving the fire to the left. He hit send. He waited. Across light years, on a planet that breathed fog and malice, Lyra Soren saw the notification ping on her hacked transmitter. She read the comment. She narrowed her eyes. She replied instantly. User, the Exiled chef. Reply, oh look, a critic. Tell me, Gourmet Watcher 88, is it hard to type with council-issue gloves on? Your syntax smells like a government report. Jonah stared at the screen. She had clocked him in 3 seconds. He typed back, his heart rate picking up. User, Gourmet Watcher 88. Reply, I am just a concerned foodie. You are reckless with your ingredients. User, the Exiled chef. Reply, and you are a terrible liar. Uneven heat distribution? No real cook talks like that. That is engineering speak. You are a spy, a pretty boy spy. I bet. Probably have a jawline that could cut glass and a soul that fits in a thimble. Jonah touched his jawline unconsciously. He hesitated. User, the Exiled chef. Reply, cook something real, coward. Show me you know what a kitchen is, and maybe I will listen to your advice. Until then, get off my feed. I have a soup to make and the air is trying to dissolve my spatula. Jonah sat back in his chair. The sterile gray room seemed suddenly very small. He looked at Lyra's defiant face frozen on the screen. Challenge accepted, he whispered. On Karen 9. The ecosystem was shifting. Lyra had been on the planet for 3 weeks, and she was beginning to notice that the world was not static. It was watching her. The river, which had been a milky opalescence, was glowing brighter now, pulsing in time with her sleep cycles. The migrations of the luminous insects had changed. They were gathering around her cave at night, forming a living curtain of light that kept the worst of the wind at bay. And the cave itself, the mouth of the land reef, seemed to be yawning wider. At night, she could hear the walls shifting, a sound like wet stones grinding together. It wasn't threatening. It sounded like the planet was listening to her snore. She was down by the riverbank, foraging for spore pods when she found the creature. It was small, sleek, and hairless, with skin the color of polished obsidian and large. Violet eyes that blinked independently of each other. It looked like a cross between an otter and a dragon. It was chewing on the remains of her charred eel from the night before. Lyra froze. The creature froze. "You are eating my leftovers," Lyra said accusationally. The creature chirped, a sound like a synthesizer glitch, and swallowed the eel bone whole. It didn't run. It took a step toward her, sniffing the air. It smelled the fresh pepper pods in her pocket. "You have expensive taste," Lyra muttered. She pulled out a cooked piece of fungus she had been saving for lunch and tossed it to the creature. The beast caught it in midair, devoured it, and then sat on its haunches, looking at her with expectant entitlement. "Fine," Lyra said. "You can stay, but you are washing the dishes." "I will call you Nib," Nib chirped again and followed her back to the cave, trotting at her heels like he had been waiting for her his entire life. He became her shadow, her audience, and her sous chef. He had an uncanny ability to sniff out rot. If Nib refused to eat something, Lyra threw it away immediately. Later that afternoon, Lyra found a patch of heavy bulbous spores growing in the shadow of a canyon wall. They were deep purple, dusted with gold pollen. She harvested one carefully. It felt heavy, dense with liquid. She brought it back to the cave. She sliced it open. The smell that wafted out was dizzying, not a smell of food, but a smell of places. It smelled like the library in her father's estate. It smelled like the perfume her mother wore. She cooked a small sliver of it. The heat released a vapor that made her head swim. She took a bite. The world dissolved. Suddenly, she wasn't in the cave. She was standing on the balcony of the High Council Hall, the wind warm on her face, the sound of crystal chimes ringing in the distance. She could feel the silk of her dress. She could taste the expensive wine she had drunk that night. It was vivid, hallucinatorily real. Then, just as quickly, it faded, leaving her gasping on the cold floor of the cave, the taste of ash in her mouth. "Taste memory," she whispered, her eyes wide. "The planet stores memories in the biology." She looked at the transmitter. She looked at the remaining spores. If she could transmit the chemical structure, the molecular breakdown of the spore, could she transmit the feeling? In the capital, the duel between Jonah and Lyra had escalated. They messaged every day. It was a game of cat and mouse, but neither seemed sure who was the cat. Jonah, still posting as Gourmet Watcher 88, would critique her knife skills. Lyra would mock his stiff, formal tone, but slowly, the tone had shifted. Jonah stopped asking about coordinates and started asking about flavor profiles. Lyra stopped calling him a spy and started asking him what the weather was like in the civilized world. User Gourmet Watcher 88. Comment: "The acid in those berries will curdle the sauce. You need an emulsifier. Use the fat from the river grubs." User: "The Exile Chef." Reply: "Oh, listen to the expert. Do you have river grubs in your office? Spy? Or are you just reading a manual?" User: Gourmet Watcher 88. Reply: "I cook. Or I used to. My grandmother taught me. She said you can tell a lot about a person by how they treat an onion." User: "The Exile Chef." Reply: "And how do I treat my onions?" User: Gourmet Watcher 8888. Reply: "With aggression. But you treat the finished dish with tenderness. It is a confusing duality." Lyra read the message twice. It was too perceptive. It was too gentle. She typed back, I found something. A spore. I am uploading the molecular spectrograph. If you really cook, recreate it, tell me what it tastes like. Jonah watched the file download. It was a complex chemical map. He had access to the council's bioprinters, machines that could synthesize organic compounds for medical testing. He shouldn't do this. He should send the file to the lab for toxin screening. He should log the data point. Instead, he stayed late after the other analysts had gone home. He fed the data into the printer in the break room. The machine whirred and produced a small purple gelatinous cube. He took it back to his desk. He heated it with a laser coil, just as Lyra had done over her fire. The smell hit him. It didn't smell like a library. It smelled like rain on a tin roof. It smelled like fear. He took a bite. At the same moment, light years away. Lyra took a bite of the same spore. The connection was instant. It wasn't telepathy. It was biology entangled through quantum observation, because they were focusing on the same sensory input. Formatted by the exact same molecular code, the distance collapsed. Lyra gasped. She didn't feel the cave. She felt cool, recycled air. She felt the smooth plastic of a keyboard under her fingertips. She felt a profound, aching loneliness that was not her own. She tasted coffee and stale adrenaline. Jonah gasped. He didn't feel the office. He felt humidity. He felt the rough stone of the cave floor. He tasted the metallic tang of the air. And he felt a defiant, burning fire in his chest that was so bright it made his eyes water. He felt her fear, buried deep under the humor. She felt his guilt, buried deep under the duty. For 10 seconds, they were one organism. It was intimate in a way that made sex look like a handshake. It was a merging of nervous systems, and it felt like their lips were hovering millimeters apart, sharing the same breath. Then the sensation broke. Jonah slumped back in his chair, shaking. Lyra dropped the spoon, her hand trembling. The chat window blinked. User, Gourmet Watcher 88. Message, you are afraid. User, the Exile Chef. Message, you are lonely. They stared at the screens. The pretense was gone. The mask of the foodie fan had dissolved. User, the Exile Chef. Message, who are you? Really? Jonah hesitated. He could lose his job. He could lose his life. User Gourmet Watcher 88. Message, my name is Jonah, and I am supposed to be the one hunting you. User the Exile Chef. Message, you are doing a terrible job. Jonah. User Gourmet Watcher 88. Message, I know, thank you for staying alive, Lyra. Lyra stared at the words. Thank you for staying alive. No one had said that to her. The council wanted her dead. The galaxy wanted entertainment. This man, this spy, wanted her to be. The moment of connection was shattered by a proximity alarm on Lyra's console. The transmitter picked up a massive energy spike in the upper atmosphere. Lyra ran to the cave mouth. Nib hissed, the hair on his back standing up. High above, through the swirling clouds, she saw a streak of fire. It wasn't a meteor. It was a drop pod. Controlled descent. Military trajectory. The council had tired of the show. They had sent a kill team. Lyra scrambled back to the transmitter. She messaged Jonah. User, the Exile Chef. Message, company is coming. They are early for dinner. Jonah's reply came instantly. User, Gourmet Watcher 88. Message, get out, now. They are not there to arrest you. They are there to sanitize the site. Move. Lyra grabbed her pack. She grabbed the transmitter. She whistled for Nib. As she ran from the cave, the storm broke. This was not a normal storm. The planet was reacting to the intruders. The wind screamed with a velocity that could strip flesh from bone. The lightning wasn't just crawling, it was hammering the ground in a protective ring around the valley. Lyra couldn't outrun the wind. She was thrown off her feet, tumbling through the black moss. The drop pod was landing to the north, jets firing. She crawled toward a cluster of massive, twisted roots near the river. They were pulsing violently. She squeezed herself into the hollow between the roots, curling into a ball. Nib shoved himself against her chest, shivering. The roots moved. They didn't crush her. They tightened around her, forming a woven cage, a cocoon of living wood. The wood was warm. It hummed with a low frequency that vibrated in her bones. Lyra realized with a jolt of awe that the planet wasn't trying to kill her. It was hiding her. She lay in the dark, the storm raging outside, the Council's death squad hunting for a ghost. She looked at the transmitter in her hand. They wanted to silence her? Fine. She pulled up the code for her next blog post. She looked at the recipe for poached void fish. She accessed the metadata of the image file. If I am going to be a weapon, she whispered to Nib, I am going to be a sharp one. She began to type. She didn't just write a recipe. She began to weave binary code into the ingredient list. The amount of salt corresponded to a council bank account number she remembered. The cooking time corresponded to the coordinates of the illegal biofacility she had suspected existed. She was turning the blog into a Trojan horse. Every view, every download, every share would spread the proof of their crimes, hidden in plain sight behind a picture of a fish. She hit upload. Recipe, survival, preparation time, indefinite, yield, 1 revolution. She closed her eyes, listening to the heartbeat of the tree that held her, and waited for the hunters to come. The descent through the atmosphere of Charon 9 was not a flight path. It was a rejection. Jonah Reyes sat strapped into the tactical jump seat of the Council stealth corvette Valkyrie, watching the hull integrity monitors scream in red. He was surrounded by 6 members of the elite retrieval unit, men and women in matte black armor who sat with the statuesque stillness of people who had killed for a living and slept soundly afterward. They had told Jonah he was there for technical support. They had told him his job was to override Lyra's transmitter so they could bring her home. They had lied. As the ship hit the storm layer, Jonah saw the mission parameters scroll across the captain's console. Objective, sanitize, target, Alpha Exile, status, terminal. He was not there to save Lyra Soren. He was there to confirm her body was cold enough to stop broadcasting. The ship lurched violently. The artificial gravity failed, and for a second, everyone floated in their harnesses before being slammed back down. "Navigation is gone," the pilot shouted, his voice cracking with a panic that professional soldiers were not supposed to feel. "The magnetic field is inverting. The compass is spinning in circles." Jonah looked at his own screen. The data was nonsensical. The planet was not just interfering with their sensors, it was feeding them false data. It was hacking them back. "We are dropping," the captain barked. "Eject! Eject all pods!" The hull groaned, a sound like a god grinding its teeth. The starboard wing sheared off, consumed by a violet cloud that looked suspiciously like a mouth. Jonah slammed his hand onto the ejection lever. Explosive bolts fired. His pod was punched out of the dying ship, tumbling into the maelstrom. He saw the Valkyrie disintegrate above him, turning into a streak of molten metal. Then, the G-force knocked the wind out of him, and the world became a kaleidoscope of purple lightning and black clouds. His pod slammed into the surface with a violence that rattled his teeth in his skull. The impact foam filled the cabin, suffocating in white, before dissolving instantly upon contact with the air. Jonah clawed at the hatch release. It was jammed. He kicked it, adrenaline surging through his veins, until the metal gave way. He tumbled out, gasping for air that tasted of copper and rain. He was in a canyon, but it was not made of stone. The walls were lined with tall, rigid reeds that grew straight up like spears. They were jet black, smooth as obsidian, and they chimed when the wind hit them. Jonah staggered forward, his head swimming. He brushed against one of the reeds. Pain flared in his arm. He looked down. The sleeve of his reinforced flight suit was sliced open as cleanly as if he had been hit with a laser scalpel. A thin line of red blood welled up on his skin. These were not plants. They were glass razors. He froze. The canyon was a field of knives, and the wind was pushing the reeds back and forth in a mesmerizing, lethal dance. Jonah Reyes, systems specialist, stood bleeding in a canyon of glass, listening to the chime of death, and realized he was going to die here. He was going to die because he had wanted to taste a spore that smelled like a library. A low hiss cut through the chiming. Jonah turned. A creature was watching him from a ledge of rock above the reeds. It was sleek, black, and had eyes that glowed like violet LEDs. It looked like an otter that had evolved to hunt sharks. It chirped at him. Jonah blinked. "Is that Nib?" The creature turned its head, looking behind it. A figure emerged from the shadows of the cliff face. She was wearing a patchwork of survival gear, scraps of her original gown woven with leather from native fauna and reinforced with scavenged metal. Her hair was a wild halo of braids and static. She looked like a queen of the scrap heap, a monarch of the storm. Lyra Soren dropped from the ledge, landing silently in the only clear patch of ground between the razor reeds. Before Jonah could speak, before he could breathe, she was on him. She moved faster than the soldiers on the ship. She grabbed his collar, spun him around, and slammed his back against a stone pillar. A blade, a crude thing made from a sharpened piece of hull metal and glowing with heat, was pressed against his throat. "Hello, Gourmet Watcher 88, Lyra whispered. Her voice was rougher than it had been on the videos, scratched by the metallic air. Jonah froze, feeling the heat of the blade against his skin. "Lyra," he rasped. "Lady Soren to you, spy," she corrected, a grin spreading across her face. It was a terrifying expression. It was the smile of someone who had won a game she did not know she was playing until this exact moment. "You look terrible. The flight suit does nothing for your complexion." "I am not here to kill you," Jonah said, staring into her eyes. They were bright, frantic, and fiercely intelligent. "I know," Lyra said. "If you were here to kill me, you would have shot me from the ledge. You are the bait, or the luggage. Which is it?" "I traced the signal," Jonah admitted. The words tumbled out. He wanted to lie, but the air on this planet seemed to strip away artifice. "I was the one who found the frequency. I led them here." He expected her to cut him. He expected rage. Instead, Lyra laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of sound. She pulled the blade back an inch. "Finally," she said. "An honest man. You have no idea how refreshing that is. The council usually wraps their betrayal in so much velvet you do not feel the knife until it hits the bone. You just fell out of the sky and admitted it." She released him, stepping back but keeping the weapon raised. "We have to move," she said, her tone shifting from mockery to command. The crash attracted every scavenger within 10 kilometers. "And if your friends survived, they will be tracking your suit's beacon." She reached out and ripped the transponder patch from his shoulder, tossing it into the razor reeds. "Come on, pretty boy. Let us see if you can walk as well as you type." They moved, on Karen 9. Stopping was a death sentence. The planet's ecosystem was predatory and opportunistic. If you stood still long enough, The moss would try to digest your boots. They scrambled up the side of the canyon, away from the glass reeds. Jonah struggled to keep up. He was an office worker, a man of desks and screens. Lyra moved like she had been born on the rock, reading the terrain with an instinct that defied logic. "Move your left foot," she called out without looking back. "That rock is hollow." Jonah sidestepped just as the stone he had been aiming for crumbled into dust. "How did you know that?" he gasped, his lungs burning. "It smelled dry," Lyra said simply. They argued as they climbed. It was a breathless, heated exchange that served as a rhythm to their march. "You should have stayed in the capital," Lyra snapped, hauling him up a steep ledge. "You could be drinking synthetic coffee and deleting my files." "I could not delete them," Jonah shot back, gripping her forearm. Her skin was warm, calloused. "You made them impossible to delete." The code was embedded in the metadata of the recipe. It was brilliant. "I know it was brilliant. I wrote it." "You are reckless," Jonah said. "You are taunting the most powerful regime in the galaxy with a cooking show. And you are the idiot who followed the broadcast to a Deathworld," Lyra countered. "Who is the reckless one?" They reached a plateau. The wind here was ferocious, whipping Lyra's hair across her face. She stopped, turning to him. They were standing inches apart, chest to chest, huddled in the lee of a boulder to escape the gale. Jonah looked at her, up close. She was a map of survival. There was a small scar on her chin. Her hands were stained with alien juices. She smelled of smoke and ozone and something sweet, like crushed berries. She looked at him. He was bleeding from the arm. His face was bruised. He looked terrified and determined all at once. "Let me see the arm," she said, her voice dropping the mockery. She pulled a small pot of salve from her belt. It was a hollowed-out nut filled with a green paste. "What is it?" Jonah asked. "Crushed root and spit," Lyra said. "Do not ask who spit." She smeared the paste on his cut. It stung, then went blissfully numb. Her fingers lingered on his skin for a second longer than necessary. Jonah felt a jolt go through him, not from the pain, but from the contact. In the isolation of the office, he had felt her mind, here, feeling her hand. The reality of her was overwhelming. She looked up. Their eyes met. The wind howled around them, but in the small space between their bodies there was a sudden, heavy silence. "Thank you," Jonah whispered. Lyra pulled her hand away sharply. "Do not thank me yet. The day is young, and the planet is hungry." She led him to a cavern system halfway up the mountain. "Welcome to the pantry," she said. Jonah looked around and blinked. The cavern was filled with stalactites, but they were not stone. They were organic, dripping with a thick amber resin. On the floor, arranged in perfect geometric spirals, were clusters of mushrooms, tubers, and pods. It looked like a garden, but the arrangement was too precise. "Did you plant these?" Jonah asked, stepping carefully over a line of blue gourds. "No," Lyra said, bending down to check a patch of moss. "They grow like this. Patterns. See? The red ones always grow in a Fibonacci spiral. The blue ones always grow in prime number clusters." Jonah knelt. He looked at the spacing of the fungi. He looked at the way the resin dripped from the ceiling, forming precise puddles. He was a systems specialist. He knew a circuit board when he saw one. "This is not just a garden," Jonah said. His voice hushed. "Lyra, this is a processor." "What?" "Biological computation," Jonah said, his mind racing. "The planet is processing data, the growth patterns. They are binary inputs, moisture, temperature, wind speed. It takes the data and outputs it as food." He looked at her with wide eyes. "You said you learned the language of the food," You did not just learn to cook, you learned to read the planet's mind. Lyra looked at the spiral of mushrooms. So, when I eat this, I am eating information? Jonah nodded. That is why the taste memory works. You are ingesting raw data that your brain interprets as sensory input. The planet is a biological supercomputer, and we are the gut bacteria, Lyra supplied dryly. Jonah laughed, a real startled laugh. Something like that, a crack of thunder that wasn't thunder echoed from the valley below. Sonic boom. Lyra went rigid, Nib hissed, arching his back. They are here, she said. The rest of your team. Jonah moved to the cave mouth. He saw 3 figures moving up the slope. They were clad in stealth suits that shimmered and blurred against the background, making them look like holes in reality. They moved with mechanical precision. They have heat sensors, Jonah said. We cannot hide. I do not plan to hide, Lyra said. She walked to the back of the pantry and grabbed a handful of large, dusty pods. They were gray and looked like dried lungs. What are those? Singing spores, Lyra said. I call them the weeping widows. Do not breathe when I throw them. She grabbed Jonah's hand. Run. They sprinted out of the cave, scrambling up a narrow goat path that winded along the cliff face. The soldiers below saw them. Plasma fire erupted, searing the rock inches from Jonah's boots. They ran until they reached a narrow ravine, a choke point where the wind swirled in a vortex. Here, Lyra yelled. She stopped, turning to face the approaching soldiers. They were closing in fast, their weapons raised. Wait for it, Lyra whispered, holding the gray pods. The soldiers reached the entrance of the ravine. The leader raised his rifle. Target acquired. His amplified voice boomed. Lyra threw the pods. They hit the ground at the soldiers' feet and burst open, and there was no explosion. Just a puff of gray dust that was instantly caught by the wind vortex. Swirling around the soldiers in a dense cloud. The soldiers didn't fire. They stopped. Through the dust, Jonah heard a sound that chilled his blood. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was sobbing. The lead soldier dropped his rifle. He fell to his knees, clutching his helmet. Mama, the soldier cried out, his voice broken and young. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to break it. The second soldier collapsed, curling into a ball, laughing hysterically. I remember, he wheezed. The sun, the water, it was so warm. The third soldier simply sat down and stared at his hands, tears streaming down his face. What is happening to them? Jonah whispered, horrified. Lyra watched them with a grim expression. Overdose, she said. Those spores contain pure, concentrated nostalgia. One breath and you are back in the most intense emotional moment of your life. They are not on Karen 9 anymore. They are trapped in their own memories. The dust drifted toward them. Jonah caught a whiff of it before he could cover his nose. It hit him like a physical blow. Suddenly, he wasn't on the cliff. He was 10 years old. He was in a small, cramped kitchen in the lower sector. The smell of rising dough filled the air. His grandmother was there, her hands covered in flour, smiling at him. She was humming a song he had forgotten. But then the memory shifted. He was older. He was in the academy. He was standing over a boy he had beaten in a sparring match. He felt the phantom sensation of his hands around the boy's throat, the shame, the thrill, the cold resolve to survive at any cost. Jonah gasped, his knees buckling. The past rushed over him, a tidal wave of every regret and every small joy he had buried under his uniform. Jonah! A hand grabbed his chest, a palm, warm and solid, pressed over his heart. Lyra was there. Her eyes were locked on his. Stay here, she commanded. Be real. Be here. Her voice anchored him. The vision of the kitchen faded. The vision of the fight dissolved. He focused on her hand. He focused on the violet of her eyes. He breathed out, shaking. I saw. He started. I know, she said softly. She didn't move her hand. It lingered on his chest, feeling the frantic rhythm of his heart. For a moment, the soldiers sobbing in the background faded. It was just the two of them, suspended on the edge of the world. Lyra. Jonah breathed. She stepped back slowly, breaking the contact. Her face was pale. We need to go, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Before the wind changes and we join them. They made camp in a hollow beneath the roots of a massive flame plant. The plant was a botanical anomaly. Its leaves produced a chemical reaction that generated a steady, smokeless heat. Lyra cooked. It was the only way she knew how to process the adrenaline. She roasted a tuber she had dug up during the run. She seasoned it with a pinch of the electric pepper. She broke the tuber in half and handed a piece to Jonah. Eat, she said. You need the energy. Jonah took it. He looked at the food. He looked at her. He took a bite. The flavor sink hit them instantly. But this time, they were not light years apart. They were sitting 2 feet from each other. The sensation was amplified. It was a feedback loop. Jonah tasted the sweet, earthy starch of the tuber, but he also felt Lyra's exhaustion. He felt the ache in her legs. He felt the fierce, protective pride she felt for him because he hadn't run away. Lyra tasted the pepper, but she also felt Jonah's awe. She felt the way he looked at her, not as an exile, not as a symbol, but as a miracle. She felt his desire, a warm, heavy current that ran beneath his fear. They stopped chewing. They stared at each other, the food forgotten. The boundary between them dissolved. The taste became a feeling. It felt like lips brushing against skin. It felt like a hand sliding into hair. It was an intimacy so profound it was almost violent. Jonah set the food down. His hands were shaking. Lyra, he whispered. He leaned in. He couldn't help it. The magnetic pull of the planet, of the moment, was too strong. Lyra didn't pull away. Her eyes fluttered shut. She leaned toward him, her breath hitching. They were inches apart. Jonah could feel the heat radiating from her skin. He wanted to cross the distance. He wanted to break the rules of the sentence. He wanted to prove that no exile was absolute. Then, a low buzz cut through the air. A drone, a council surveillance drone, hovering high in the darkness, watching. Jonah froze. He pulled back, his chest heaving. "Ooh, we are being watched," he whispered, his voice broken. Lyra opened her eyes. She looked at the sky, then back at him. She saw the tremble in his hands. She saw the restraint that cost him everything to maintain. She reached out and touched his cheek. Her thumb brushed his jawline. "Restraint can be love too," she whispered. But her eyes were dark and dilated. They said something else. They said she hated the restraint. They said she wanted him to break. They said she was hungry for something that didn't grow on a vine. Jonah closed his eyes, leaning into her touch for a second, savoring the ghost of a kiss that never happened. They moved on before dawn, driven by the knowledge that the drone meant more soldiers were coming. They followed the root system of the flame plant, heading deeper into the valley, toward the massive land reef that Lyra called home. But as they approached the reef mouth, Lyra stopped. "Look," she pointed, at the base of the reef, where the living coral met the black soil. The storm had eroded the ground. Something metal was gleaming in the dirt. They approached it. It wasn't debris from a crash. It was a structure. Jonah brushed the dirt away. It was a door. A massive, blast-proof airlock door, set directly into the living tissue of the planet. The metal was fused with the coral. The planet had grown around it. Jonah read the markings on the door. His blood ran cold. Project Demeter. Clearance. High Council only. He looked at Lyra. "This is not a survival shelter," he said. "This is a facility." Lyra touched the cold metal. "They didn't just dump us here," she said, her voice hard. "They built this." She looked at the vast breathing landscape of Karen 9. The planet wasn't empty. Jonah, it was occupied. She turned to him, and the humor was gone from her face. In its place was a cold, terrifying resolve. "They are farming it," she said. "They are farming the memories." She pulled out her heat blade. "Open it," she ordered. Jonah looked at the keypad. He looked at the woman who had turned a death sentence into a menu. He cracked his knuckles. "Yes, chef," he said. He began to hack the door. The lock hissed, and the heavy metal groaned open, revealing a dark corridor that smelled of sterile air and stolen lives. They stepped inside, leaving the wind and the singing spores behind, walking into the belly of the beast that had tried to eat them both. The ventilation shaft did not smell like a machine. It smelled like the inside of a lung. Jonah Reyes crawled on his hands and knees, the metal grating biting into his palms. The air pushing against his face was warm, humid, and thick with the scent of salt and copper. The walls of the shaft were not smooth steel. They were lined with a thin, translucent membrane that pulsed rhythmically, expanding and contracting with a low, wet sound. "This is disgusting," Jonah whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the cramped space. "It is efficient," Lyra whispered back from ahead of him. Her boots were inches from his face. "Why build air recyclers when the planet breathes for you? Just hook a pipe into the ecosystem and let the biosphere do the work. It is brilliant and gross, but mostly brilliant." They were deep inside the facility they had discovered beneath the reef mouth. The structure was a parasite. A cold block of council engineering fused violently into the living tissue of Karen 9. Jonah paused to wipe sweat from his eyes. The heat was oppressive. "We are approaching a junction," he said, checking the bioscanner on his wrist. "The airflow increases to the left. That should be the central exchange." Lyra shimmied forward, kicking a grate loose with her heel. It clattered onto a walkway below. "After you, the pretty boy," she said, rolling onto her back to let him pass. Jonah dropped down. He landed in a corridor that looked like a hospital designed by a butcher. The floor was pristine white tile, but the walls were encroached upon by the planet's black roots, which had burst through the containment panels like veins seeking the surface. Lyra dropped down beside him, her heat blade instantly in her hand. They moved silently toward the central lab. The heavy blast doors were locked, but Jonah bypassed the keypad in 10 seconds, his fingers flying over the holographic interface. He expected guards. He expected a command center. He did not expect a farm. The room was vast, stretching upward into the darkness. Rows of transparent stasis tanks lined the walls, hundreds of them, bathed in a soft amber light. Inside each tank, suspended in a thick gel-like fluid, was a human. Lyra walked toward the nearest tank. Her breath hitched. "I know him," she whispered, her hand hovering over the glass. "That is Senator Harth. He disappeared 3 years ago. They said he died in a shuttle accident." She moved to the next tank. And her, Lady Vane's niece. She was exiled for leaking trade secrets. Jonah scanned the console at the base of the tank. The data scrolled past, cold and clinical. Subject 4409, status dormant. Enzyme production, optimal. "They are not dead," Jonah said. his voice trembling with a mixture of horror and rage. They are alive. He pulled up the facility's schematic. Look at the fluid. Lyra, it is a filtration system. They are pumping the planet's atmosphere into these tanks. The subjects inhale the spores, the heavy metals, the raw biology of Karen 9. Their bodies process it, filter it, and produce an enzyme to survive the toxicity. And the Council harvests the enzyme. Lyra finished, her eyes hardening into flint. She looked at the piping that ran from the tanks into a central collection unit. What does it do? She asked. Jonah tapped a few keys, accessing the research logs. It is a neuroenhancer. He read, it allows for perfect recall, heightened sensory processing, emotional suppression. It is the drug that keeps the High Council functioning. They are not just smarter than everyone else. Lyra, they are chemically altered. And they are using the exiles as biological filters to make it. Lyra stepped back, looking at the rows of sleeping bodies. They were not prisoners. They were livestock. The counselors funded their dominance with this, she said, her voice low and dangerous. They erased their enemies, sent them here, and turned them into batteries for their own genius. It is a perfect circle of corruption. She raised her data pad. I am recording this, every tank, every name. She panned the camera across the room, capturing the faces of the lost, the tubes, the council sigils stamped on the collection jars. We need to send this, she said. Now. Jonah shook his head, looking at his scanner. We can't. There is a jammer field around the facility, a localized dampening bubble. Nothing gets out, not even your hacked signal. Lyra lowered the pad. Then we take it with us. She ran to the main console. Where are the data cores? Jonah pointed to a bank of servers near the back wall. There. But pulling them will trigger the alarm. The system monitors the connection. As soon as we disconnect the drive, the facility wakes up. Lyra grinned. It was a sharp, terrified, beautiful expression. Good. I was getting tired of whispering. They pulled the cores. The moment Jonah yanked the magnetic drive from the server, the lights turned red. A siren began to wail, a mechanical scream that clashed with the organic thrum of the facility. Breach detected, lockdown initiated, sterilization protocols active. Run! Jonah yelled, shoving the heavy data core into his pack. They sprinted back toward the corridor, but the facility was changing. The walls, which had been static, began to move. The black roots of the planet, agitated by the facility's distress signal, surged forward. They burst through the tiles, weaving together to block the path. The living walls tightened, the corridor narrowing like a throat constricting. To the right! Lyra shouted. They dove into a maintenance tunnel just as the main corridor sealed shut with a crunch of crushing metal. They were in a service passage, pipes hissing steam around them. This place is trying to digest us, Jonah panted, stumbling over a loose cable. It is just aggressive hospitality, Lyra yelled back, vaulting over a steam pipe. Keep moving. They could hear heavy boots behind them. The kill team. The elite soldiers had entered the facility. Jonah stopped at a sealed hatch. He tried the keypad. It's jammed! He shouted. Lyra looked back. Shadows were moving at the end of the tunnel. Laser sights cut through the steam. She grabbed Jonah's arm and dragged him toward a small, recessed panel in the wall. It was a breaker box, barely large enough for a person. Get in, she hissed. We will not fit. We fit or we die. She shoved him inside and scrambled in after him, pulling the metal panel shut just as a plasma bolt scorched the wall where they had been standing. The space was impossibly small. It was a vertical crawl space filled with warm cables. They were pressed together, chest to chest, legs tangled. Jonah's back was against the humming machinery. Lyra was pressed against him, her face inches from his. They froze. Outside, heavy footsteps clanked past. Clear. Check the next sector, a distorted voice commanded. The footsteps faded. In the darkness of the breaker box, the silence was loud. Jonah could hear Lyra's heart hammering against his own ribs. He could feel the rapid rise and fall of her breath against his neck. They were covered in sweat, dirt, and the grime of the ventilation shaft. "So," Lyra whispered, her voice shaking slightly. "This is cozy." Jonah let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "We are trapped in a wall." Lyra, better than being processed into brain juice for a politician, she quipped. "Though, I suppose that counts as government-sponsored cannibalism, consuming the people to feed the power. It is almost poetic." "You are making jokes," Jonah muttered, closing his eyes. "I am going to resign from reality. Humor is how I keep from screaming. Jonah, you should try it. I am not funny. No, you are not. You are terrifyingly serious. It is your best quality." Jonah opened his eyes, in the dim red light filtering through the cracks in the panel. Lyra's eyes were huge, dark pools of adrenaline and fear. She wasn't smiling. "Why are you shaking?" she asked softly. Jonah looked down, his hands resting on her waist because there was nowhere else to put them. "We're trembling." "I am afraid," he admitted. "Of the soldiers?" "No." "Of the planet?" "No." Lyra tilted her head, a bead of sweat tracking down her temple. "Then what?" "I am afraid because I want to kiss you," Jonah whispered. The truth fell out of his mouth before he could stop it. "And if I kiss you, I lose my focus. And if I lose my focus, you die. And wanting that, wanting you, makes me weak." Lyra went still. The banter evaporated. She moved her hand up, her fingers grazing the back of his neck, tangling in his short hair. "You idiot," she breathed. "Wanting is the only honest thing we have got left. Everything else is a lie, the trial, the exile, the mission. This is real." She leaned in. It wasn't a kiss, not yet. It was a collision of gravity. Their foreheads touched, their noses brushed, their lips hovered millimeters apart, occupying the same breath. It was a full-body circuit closing. Jonah felt the heat of her skin searing through his flight suit. He felt the desperate, hungry energy radiating off her. It was the feeling of standing on a ledge and looking down, terrified of the fall and desperate to jump. He tightened his grip on her waist. She made a small, wrecked sound in her throat. For a second, the war didn't exist. The council didn't exist. There was only the heat, the salt smell of her skin, and the overwhelming, terrifying fact that he would burn the galaxy down just to keep her warm. A loud clang echoed from the tunnel outside. "They are doubling back," a voice shouted. The moment shattered. Lyra pulled back, her eyes wide and breathless. She looked at him, and he saw the promise in her gaze. "Later, if we live. Later." She kicked the panel open. "Move!" she yelled. They tumbled out of the maintenance shaft and ran. They burst out of the facility's rear exhaust port, spilling onto the riverbank of the valley. The storm was raging overhead, the violet sky churning with fury. The kill team was right behind them. 3 armored figures emerged from the steam, weapons raised. Lyra didn't just run, she fought. She reached into her pouch and pulled out a handful of the dried, weeping widow spores and a cluster of volatile seed pods she had harvested. She didn't throw them at the soldiers. She threw them into the river of lava-hot geysers that lined the bank. The heat hit the spores. "Cover your face!" Lyra screamed, pulling her cowl up. The pods exploded not with shrapnel, but with a dense, oily smoke that smelled of burning cinnamon and rot. It was a culinary weapon, a smoke spice bomb. The cloud engulfed the soldiers. Their sensors were useless in the particulate matter. The spice clogged their air filters, burning their lungs. Lyra dragged Jonah toward the razor reeds. She grabbed a handful of roots from the ground, the ones she had identified as paralytic on her first day. She snapped them open and smeared the sap on the edge of her heat blade. She turned to Jonah. "I am cooking," she said, her grin feral. "And the secret ingredient is neurotoxin." A soldier lunged out of the smoke, blind firing. Lyra ducked, sliding under his guard with the grace of a dancer. She slashed his leg armor, the blade cutting through the seal. The sap touched his skin. He collapsed instantly, his leg numb, his balance gone. Jonah wasn't watching. He was staring at the device on his wrist. It was his council locator beacon, the one that was transmitting his vitals, the one that could call a retrieval ship for him, and him alone. If he kept it, he had a way out. If he kept it, he could claim he was a hostage. He could survive. He looked at Lyra, who was fighting a soldier twice her size with a knife and a handful of roots. He looked at the beacon. Status: signal strong. Evacuation protocol ready. Jonah Reyes, the man who never broke a rule, ripped the device from his wrist. He threw it onto the ground and crushed it with his boot. Then, he drew his own sidearm, a standard-issue blaster he had never fired, and shot the shattered remains of the beacon until it was nothing but slag. He burned the bridge. He resigned from the world. He turned and fired a suppression shot at the remaining soldier, forcing him back. "Lyra, to the river!" Jonah shouted. They jumped into the glowing, lukewarm water of the alien river, letting the current sweep them away from the chaos, disappearing into the fog like ghosts. They washed up 3 miles downstream, near Lyra's original crash site. They were soaked, shivering, and alive. They had the data cores, but they still had the problem of the jammers. "The facility's field extended for 50 miles, that we can't transmit the raw data," Lyra said, pacing back and forth in their small cave. "The file size is too big. The jammer will flag it as a data breach and shut it down." Jonah looked at the core. "We need to compress it, hide it inside something else. Something the jammer filters recognize as harmless." Lyra looked at the transmitter. "Harmless," she repeated, like a cooking show. She grabbed her supplies. "We are going live," she said. "What?" "We are going to do a live cook. I will stream it. The jammer allows my blog traffic because the council thinks it is just a joke. They haven't patched the hole yet because they are arrogant." She set up the camera. She arranged the ingredients she had left, the glowing mollusks, the electric peppers, a slab of void fish. "Jonah, strip the data, convert the binary code into pixel shading. We are going to overlay the evidence onto the video feed. Every frame of the video will contain a page of the Exile records." Jonah's eyes widened. "Steganography, hiding the file in the image noise. Exactly. While I am teaching the galaxy how to make galaxy glaze, they will be downloading the death warrants of their own families." They worked frantically. Jonah coded. Lyra prepped. 10 minutes later, the red light on the camera blinked on. Lyra Soren stepped into the frame. She was bruised. Her dress was in tatters. Her hair was wild, but her smile was blinding. "Hello, stargazers," she chirped, her voice steady. "Tonight, we have a very special episode. I call this dish the Truth Tartare. It is a little bitter, but it goes down smooth." She began to cook. She chopped with aggressive precision. She flamed the fish. She joked about the weather. Behind the camera, Jonah monitored the upload. Upload speed, 98%. Data packet hidden. The viewers saw a woman making a strange, glowing stew, but the code beneath the video was flooding the galactic net. It was pinging search engines, news aggregators, and private servers. User, KitchenWitch99 commented, "That sauce looks radioactive." User, Truthseeker commented, "Why is my download file so big?" Lyra looked into the lens. "Now," she said, holding up the finished dish. "The most important part of any meal is sharing it. So please download this recipe. Share it with your friends. Share it with your local magistrate. Make sure everyone gets a taste." She took a bite. She didn't swallow. She stared into the camera with a defiance that burned through the screen. Because you never know what you are really eating until it is too late. She cut the feed. The reaction was not immediate. It was a slow, rolling thunder. First came the confusion. People decoding the file found names, dates, genetic sequences. Then came the realization. A mother in the beta sector found her son's name on a list of harvested subjects. A journalist in the capital found the financial records linking the High Counselor of Trade to the illegal facility. The internet exploded. It wasn't just a viral video anymore. It was a revolution disguised as a zip file. But the council struck back hard. Jonah and Lyra huddled around the datapad, watching the news feeds. Breaking news. Terrorist cell identified. The Exile Chef blog has been declared a sophisticated psychological operation by separatist forces. Possession of the corrupted data files is a Class A felony. The screen shifted to footage from the capital. Military police were kicking down doors. They were dragging people out of their homes, teenagers who had shared the meme, chefs who had recreated the recipes, ordinary people who just wanted to believe that Lyra was alive. Lyra watched a young girl being shoved into a containment van. The girl was wearing a t-shirt that said, "The No Return Bistro." Lyra's hand flew to her mouth. "No," she whispered. She watched a restaurant being raided, the owners beaten in the street. "Stop it," she pleaded with the screen. "Stop it." She dropped the pad. She backed away, hitting the wall of the cave. Her knees gave out, and she slid down to the floor. "I did this," she choked out. "They are hurting them because of me. I thought it was funny. I thought I was being clever." The armor cracked. The wit, the sarcasm, the too charming to be dangerous persona, it all shattered. She wasn't a symbol. She was just a woman who had started a fire she couldn't control. And now other people were burning. "I am just a cook," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I am just a stupid cook." Jonah crossed the room. He didn't stand over her. He knelt. He didn't say, "It's not your fault." That would have been a lie. He reached out and took her hands, pulling them away from her face. "Lyra, look at me." She shook her head, tears streaming down the grime on her cheeks. "Look at me." She looked. "You are not just a cook," Jonah said fiercely. "And they are not just fans. They are a movement. The council is arresting them because they are terrified. They are hurting them," Lyra cried. "Yes, because you gave them something the council cannot legislate. You gave them hope. You gave them a community." Jonah gripped her hands tighter. "You turned a death sentence into a dinner party. Lyra, you made people feel less alone. That is not a joke. That is a weapon. Comfort. Feeding people. That is how you start a revolution. You don't start it with guns. You start it by showing people that they deserve to be warm, that they deserve to be fed." Lyra sniffed, wiping her nose with her sleeve. "But I am hiding in a cave," she whispered, "and they are in prison." Jonah nodded. "You are right. We can't stay here. He stood up, pulling her with him. If we stay, you become a ghost story, a tragedy. He looked at the storm outside. He looked at the ship records he had stolen from the facility. We have to go back. Lyra stared at him. Back to the capital. They will kill us before we land. Maybe, Jonah said. Or maybe they will be too busy fighting a million people who are hungry for the truth. He touched her cheek, wiping away a tear. We go back. We take the evidence to the Senate floor. We face them. Together. Lyra looked at him. She saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear he had admitted to in the wall. But she also saw the steel. She took a deep breath. She straightened her spine. She was Lyra Soren. She had survived the storm. She had survived the harvest. Okay, she said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. We go back. She looked at the remains of their meal. But first, she said, a faint glimmer of her old spark returning to her eyes. We pack snacks. It is a long flight. The launch bay of the hidden facility was a cathedral of echoes and rust. The shuttle they had commandeered was a decommissioned cargo hauler, a bulky, ugly thing that looked less like a spaceship and more like a brick with thrusters. Jonah sat in the pilot's seat, his hands flying across a console that was lit up with more red warning lights than green. The wind of Karen 9 was hammering against the bay doors, a rhythmic booming that sounded like a giant fist demanding entry. Hydraulic pressure is at 40%, Jonah yelled over the roar of the pre-ignition cycle. The heat shielding on the port side is cracked. If we hit the storm layer at the wrong angle, we are going to be cooked inside the hull. Lyra strapped herself into the co-pilot seat. She wasn't looking at the sensors. She was looking at the planet outside the viewport. The violet fog was swirling in a frenzy, the lightning crawling over the bay doors as if trying to weld them shut. It doesn't want us to leave, Jonah muttered, his voice tight with the specific panic of an engineer who knows exactly how many things are about to break. Or it wants us to carry the message, Lyra said. She keyed the intercom, though only the two of them could hear it. Welcome to the final episode of The Exiled Chef. Today's recipe is high-altitude escape. Step 1. Preheat the engines until they threaten to explode. Jonah looked at her, his eyes wide. You are doing the narration thing again. It helps me focus, Lyra snapped, her hands gripping the armrests until her knuckles turned white. Step 2. Add a generous amount of thrust and pray the mixture doesn't curdle. Punch it, Jonah! Jonah slammed the throttle forward. The shuttle lurched. It didn't glide. It tore itself free from the gravity well with a scream of tortured metal. They shot out of the bay and straight into the throat of the storm. The ascent was not a flight. It was a physical brawl with physics. The G-force slammed them back into their seats. The cabin rattled so violently that Lyra's vision blurred. Warning, the ship's computer droned. Structural integrity failing. Gravity stabilizers offline. We are tumbling, Jonah shouted, fighting the yoke. The wind shear is too strong. Lyra closed her eyes. She imagined she was in a kitchen, a chaotic, high-pressure dinner service. Just fold it in, she shouted, her voice shaking. Treat the turbulence like egg whites. Jonah, don't fight it, fold it. That makes no aerodynamic sense, Jonah screamed back. But his hands adjusted. He stopped fighting the shear and leaned into it, letting the storm spit them upward instead of crushing them. The hull groaned. A piece of plating ripped off the wing, flashing past the window like a silver coin. Step 3, Lyra narrated through gritted teeth. Reduce heat and let simmer. Come on, come on. They broke through the cloud layer. The violet violence vanished, replaced instantly by the silent velvet black of space. The stars hung there, cold and indifferent and beautiful. The shaking stopped. The roaring faded to the hum of the life support systems. Jonah slumped forward, gasping for air. "We are out," he whispered. "We are alive." Lyra unbuckled her harness. She floated slightly, the artificial gravity was indeed offline, and pulled herself toward the window. Below them, Karen 9 was a swirling marble of bruise-colored clouds. It looked peaceful from this distance. "Goodbye, Nib," she whispered. She turned to Jonah. He was staring at the navigation console. His face was pale. "What is it?" Lyra asked. "We have a signal," Jonah said, "from the capital." He put it on the main screen. It was a news feed. The headline scrolled in bold. "Aggressive crimson. Terrorist plot foiled. Impersonator identified." On the screen, High Counselor Vane was standing at a podium. He looked grave, paternal, and utterly sincere. "Citizens of the Concord," Vane said, his voice smooth as aged brandy. "We have received disturbing reports of a separatist cell broadcasting deep-fake signals from the Outer Rim. They have created a digital puppet, a cruel mockery of the late Lady Lyra Soren to incite unrest." The screen shifted to a photo of Jonah. "They have also kidnapped a mid-level systems analyst, Jonah Reyes, forcing him to aid in their deception. We assure you the real Lyra Soren perished 3 months ago. This blog is a weapon designed to target your morale. Do not be fooled." Lyra stared at the screen. She felt a cold, hollow sensation in her stomach. "They erased me," she said softly. "I am standing right here, and they just deleted me." Jonah looked at her. "They control the network. Lyra, they control the truth." Lyra's eyes narrowed. The hollow feeling vanished, replaced by the familiar spark of anger, the same anger that had helped her survive the razor reeds. "They control the network," she corrected, "but they do not control the menu." They arrived in the capital system 3 days later, drifting in on a cargo trajectory to avoid the military patrols. The capital world, Ethelgard, was a jewel of lights and commerce. Orbital stations spun like diamond necklaces around the equator. Ships moved in orderly lines. It was clean. It was civilized. It was a lie. They landed the battered shuttle in the lower districts, bribing the dockmaster with the last of the pure platinum components from the shuttle's engine. The city was tense. Lyra could feel it in the air, a vibration distinct from the hum of traffic. They walked through the markets, hoods pulled low. "Look," Jonah whispered, nudging her. On a street corner, a vendor was selling noodle bowls, but on the side of his cart, chalked in rough, hasty lines, was a drawing of a mollusk shell. Lyra stopped. She listened. The vendor handed a bowl to a customer, a young woman in a mechanic's jumpsuit. "Try the broth," the vendor said quietly. "It has a kick, like electric pepper." The woman smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Storm-fried," she replied. It was a code. Lyra felt tears prick her eyes. They hadn't believed the council. They kept walking. They saw it everywhere. A bakery displaying bread braided into the shape of the Fibonacci spiral Lyra had shown in her pantry video. A group of students wearing pins shaped like blue fruit. "The pantry uprising," Lyra whispered. "It is not an army. It is a potluck." They found shelter in the back room of a restaurant owned by an old friend of Lyra's family. A chef named Marlowe, who had once been the toast of the High Court before he was pushed out for refusing to use synthetic meats. Marlowe hugged Lyra until her ribs creaked. "I knew it," he sobbed into her shoulder. "I knew that seasoning was yours. No algorithm understands acid balance like that. He fed them real food, roast fowl and root vegetables, and caught them up on the war." "It is messy," Marlowe said, pouring wine with a shaking hand. "The council is cracking down. They are arresting anyone who downloads the recipes, but the more they arrest, the more people cook. It has become a thing, a way to say no without speaking. He slammed a hand on the table. But they are terrified of you, Lyra. Vane is losing control. That is why he sent the invitation. Invitation? Jonah asked. Marlowe slid a heavy cream-colored envelope across the table. It was sealed with the council's wax crest. It arrived at the old Soren estate this morning, Marlowe said. It is addressed to the impersonator. Lyra broke the seal. She read the card aloud, to the entity claiming the name of Lyra Soren. The High Council invites you to a public reconciliation gala at the Grand Spire. Come and prove your identity. If you are truly her, you have nothing to fear. If you are a fraud, justice will be swift. It is a trap, Jonah said immediately. A public execution disguised as a party. They will arrest you the moment you step on stage. They will claim your DNA doesn't match. They will doctor the tests live on air. Of course it is a trap, Lyra said, tracing the gold lettering. They want a spectacle. They want to crush the symbol in front of the whole galaxy to show that resistance is futile. She looked up. Her eyes were bright. So, we give them a spectacle. Lyra? Jonah started, a warning in his voice. I accept, Lyra told Marlowe. But I have conditions. If they want me to prove I am Lyra Soren, I will do it the only way that matters. I insist on catering the event. Marlowe choked on his wine. You want to cook for the people who tried to kill you? Lyra smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted a wounded gazelle. I want to host a ceremonial tasting. It is an old tradition, isn't it? The accused offering a meal of peace? They cannot refuse without looking weak. And the council loves pageantry more than they love power. She turned to Jonah. We have the synth samples we stole from the facility, the raw enzyme extract. Jonah went pale. Lyra, that is toxic. In high doses. Yes, Lyra said. In microdoses, it is just flavoring. It triggers memory. It triggers sensation. She leaned forward. I am going to feed them their own crimes. Jonah, and I am going to make them swallow it on live television. The Grand Spire was the highest point on the capital world, a needle of glass piercing the clouds. The Gala of Reconciliation was the event of the decade. The ballroom was suspended in a gravity-dampened field, allowing guests to float gently if they wished. Floating chandeliers made of real diamonds drifted overhead like jellyfish. The floor was a mosaic of rare stones. The air smelled of expensive perfume and ozone. The room was packed with the elite of the Orion Concord, counselors in robes of crushed velvet, military generals in dress uniforms, socialites with skin dyed to match their jewelry. They held crystal flutes and smiled with their teeth, their eyes darting toward the massive doors. They were waiting for the show. They were waiting for the takedown. The doors opened. Lyra Soren walked in. She was not wearing the rags of her exile. Marlowe and the uprising had worked for 24 hours to create a gown that was a weapon in itself. It was made of a shimmering, jagged fabric that looked like black glass. It moved like smoke. It looked like the storm clouds of Karen 9. She wore no jewelry. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, sharp braid. Beside her walked Jonah. He was in a tailored suit that fit him poorly, his posture stiff. He looked like what he was, a soldier in disguise, a storm held in a human body. The room went silent. Lyra walked to the center of the room, her chin high. She looked at the high counselors sitting on their raised dais. She saw Vane. She saw Kalen. She saw the flicker of doubt in their eyes. Is it her? Jonah stayed a step behind her. He scanned the room. counting guards, spotting drone cameras. His hand hovered near his pocket, where a small data drive was hidden. The tension was suffocating. Every glance from the crowd was a loaded gun. Lyra approached the dais. "Hi, Counselor," she said, her voice clear and amplified by the room's acoustics. "You asked for Lyra Soren. Here I am." Vane stood up. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We shall see," he said smoothly. "You have requested to serve the ceremonial course. A quaint gesture. Proceed. But know that our bioscanners are analyzing you as we speak." Lyra didn't flinch. "I would expect nothing less," she said. She gestured to the serving staff, members of the uprising who had infiltrated the catering crew. They moved forward, carrying silver trays. "Tonight," Lyra announced, addressing the room and the millions watching the broadcast, "I present a tasting menu entitled The Harvest." The waiters placed small, elegant dishes in front of the counselors and the VIPs. It was a single, translucent sphere of gelatin, resting on a bed of black moss. "Please," Lyra said. "Taste." Vane looked at the sphere. He looked at Lyra. He couldn't show fear. He picked up his spoon and ate it. The others followed suit. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Vane dropped his spoon. It clattered loudly on the floor. The enzyme Lyra had used was the fear extract. It was the chemical signature of the exiles in the tanks, distilled and concentrated. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a feeling. Vane gasped, clutching his chest. He felt the cold of the cryo tank. He felt the suffocating darkness. He felt the absolute paralyzing terror of being erased. Around the room, dignitaries turned pale. Some wept silently. Others gripped the table, their eyes wide with a panic they couldn't explain. "What is this?" Kalen choked out, his face gray. Lyra stepped forward. "It is the taste of your success, Counselor," she said coldly. "It is the flavor of the enzymes you have been mining. You wanted to live forever? You wanted perfect recall? Then recall them." She pointed to the sphere. "That is Senator Hearth's fear. That is Lady Vane's despair. It is a local delicacy from Karen 9. I thought you would appreciate the authenticity." Kalen slammed his hand on the table, fighting the chemical dread. "She is poisoning us," he screamed. "Guards! Seize the kitchen clown." Lyra laughed. It was the same laugh she had used in the cave, sharp and armor-plated. "A clown?" she repeated. "You call me a clown? Kalen?" She looked at the camera drones. "Clowns are useful. They make the crowd look where they want them to look. While you were looking at me." She signaled Jonah. "Now!" Jonah pulled the data drive. He didn't plug it into a terminal. He dropped it into a glass of water on a passing tray. The drive was water-soluble, designed to dissolve and release a localized viral pulse. The room's holographic projectors flickered. The floating chandeliers dimmed. Then, the air above the ballroom exploded with light. It wasn't the gala feed, it was the blog. Giant 20-foot holograms of Lyra's videos appeared, but overlaid on the images of cooking and storms were the lists. Thousands of names. Subject 4409, status harvested. Subject 10, status harvested. The facility records scrolled like a waterfall of data. The bank transfers, the signatures of Vane and Kalen authorizing the abductions. The crowd in the ballroom screamed. This wasn't a rumor. This wasn't a deep fake. This was the raw, unedited database of the Council's own network. Jonah yelled over the chaos. "They are not dead. They are in the tanks. Look at the names." Chaos erupted. The dignitaries, confused and terrified by the fear enzyme and the revelations, began to panic. But the waiters, the uprising, threw off their jackets. Underneath, They wore shirts with the No Return Bistro logo. They began to chant. It started as a murmur, then a roar. Storm fried, storm fried. It was nonsensical to the guards, but to the people, it was a battle cry. It meant survival. Security forces swarmed the room. Laser fire cut through the air, shattering the floating chandeliers. Diamonds rained down like hail. Lyra stood in the center of the storm, calm. Vane grabbed a guard's weapon. He pointed it at Lyra. "Shut it off," he screamed. "Shut it off or I kill her." The room froze. Vane was trembling, the fear enzyme still coursing through him. Lyra looked at the barrel of the gun. She didn't move. Kalen stepped forward, pushing Vane's arm down. He was more pragmatic. He saw the cameras were still rolling. "Wait," Kalen hissed. He looked at Lyra, then he looked at Jonah, who was standing by the console he had just hacked. Unarmed. Kalen smiled. It was a reptile's smile. A deal. "Lady Soren," Kalen said, his voice projecting over the room. "We can make this disappear. We can say it was a simulation, a performance art piece. You admit you lied. You admit this is a hoax." "And if I don't?" Lyra asked. Kalen pointed at Jonah. "Then we execute the kidnapper. Right now. Live." Guards grabbed Jonah. Two of them forced him to his knees. A blaster was pressed to the back of his head. Lyra's calm shattered. She took a step forward, her hand reaching out. "No!" she cried. "Admit it!" Kalen demanded. "Tell the galaxy you are a fraud. Tell them the blog is a lie, and the boy lives." Lyra looked at Jonah. He was on his knees, surrounded by glass and enemies. He looked small. He looked terrified. She looked at the counselors. If she lied, the movement died. The exiles in the tanks would never be found. The truth would be buried forever, Nords. But if she told the truth, Jonah died. Love makes cowardice tempting. It whispered to her that nothing mattered but him. It told her to burn the galaxy to save one man. Lyra started, her voice breaking. She looked at Jonah. He locked eyes with her. He saw her resolving to surrender. He saw her about to trade the revolution for his heartbeat. Jonah shook his head. "No," he said. "Silence!" a guard shouted, striking him. Jonah spat blood on the mosaic floor. He looked up at the camera. "My name is Jonah Reyes," he shouted. "I am a systems specialist for the High Council, clearance level 5. He looked directly at Vane. "I was not kidnapped. I traced her signal. I found the facility. I saw the tanks." He turned his gaze to Lyra. "Do not do it. Lyra, do not trade the truth for me. Be real," Kalen snarled. "Kill him." The guard tightened his finger on the trigger. Lyra didn't scream. She moved. She grabbed a silver platter from a table and flung it like a discus. It wasn't a weapon of war, but Lyra had spent months throwing heavy slate rocks at scavengers. The platter struck the guard in the throat. He gagged, his shot going wide, scorching the floor. Jonah slammed his elbow backward into the guard's groin, scrambling free. Lyra ran to him. The crowd surged. The uprising had been waiting for a signal, and this was it. The waiters flipped tables, creating barricades. Guests who had lost family members to the exile began to tackle the guards. It was a riot of high society and kitchen staff. Lyra reached Jonah. She grabbed his lapels, hauling him up. "You idiot," she yelled, tears streaming down her face. "You noble, stupid idiot." Jonah was bleeding from the mouth. He was shaking. "I resigned. Remember?" He gasped. They were surrounded by chaos, laser fire, screaming, falling glass. But for 1 second, they were the only two people in the universe. Lyra grabbed his hand. She squeezed it so hard her nails dug into his skin. It wasn't a kiss. They didn't have time for a kiss. It was an anchor. It was a promise that said, I have you. We have to go, Jonah yelled. Marlowe appeared through the smoke, wielding a massive rolling pin like a club. The kitchen elevator, Marlowe shouted. Go! They ran. They dodged through the fighting, slipping on the diamond-covered floor. They reached the service elevator and dove inside. The doors slid shut just as a plasma bolt scarred the metal. They escaped into the night, slipping into the maze of the lower city where the surveillance drones couldn't track them. But the victory was Pyrrhic, as they huddled in a safe house, a cramped storage room behind a noodle shop. The screens lit up with the council's response. Emergency Decree 990 declared, martial law in effect, all communications networks suspended, bounties issued, Lyra Soren, 5 million credits, Jonah Reyes, 5 million credits. The galaxy had seen the truth, but the council still had the guns. Lyra sat on a crate of dehydrated rice, watching the news. Her gown was torn. She was exhausted. Jonah sat beside her, bandaging his hand. We started a war, he said quietly. Lyra looked at him. She took the bandage from his hands and finished wrapping it herself. Her touch was gentle, practiced. No, she said, tying the knot. The war was already there. We just turned on the lights so people could see who they were fighting. She looked at the small, dirty room. It was a long way from the gala. It was a long way from the palace she had been born in. But she looked at Jonah, and she felt a strange, fierce hunger that had nothing to do with food. So, she said, reaching into her pocket and pulling out a single crushed packet of the electric pepper she had saved. What do we cook next? The underbelly of the capital city of Ethelgard was a world that had forgotten the sun. Down here, in the sub-levels where the foundation supports of the great spires groaned under the weight of the aristocracy above, the air tasted of recycled steam and synthetic spices. Neon signage, glitching and buzzing in angry violets and toxic greens, illuminated the faces of the people the High Council preferred not to see. Lyra Soren pulled the hood of her scavenged cloak tighter. She walked close to the damp walls, her eyes scanning the shadows. Beside her, Jonah Reyes moved with the efficient, paranoid grace of a man who knew exactly how facial recognition drones patrolled the grid. They were in the shadow market, a sprawling labyrinth of stalls squeezed between the massive heat exchange pipes of the city. Here, illicit goods were traded openly, unregistered data chips, bootleg medicine, and real food. Lyra kept her head down, but it was useless. They knew her. A woman selling grilled skewers froze as Lyra passed. She didn't call out. She didn't point. She simply pressed her hands together in a silent gesture of reverence and whispered a single word. Chef. It rippled down the alleyway. Vendors stopped hawking their wares. Thieves paused in the middle of picking pockets. Chef. 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 It was a whisper that sounded like a prayer. It was a title that carried more weight than lady or counselor ever had. Lyra quickened her pace, her heart hammering against her ribs. She ducked into a narrow service corridor, dragging Jonah with her. She leaned against the vibrating metal of a steam pipe, gasping for breath. "Stop it," she hissed, pressing her hands over her ears. "Make them stop. They are not trying to expose you," Jonah said gently, standing guard at the entrance of the alley. "They are thanking you." "I do not want their thanks," Lyra snapped, her voice cracking. "I want to survive. I did not ask for this. Jonah, I did not ask to be a saint of the soup kitchen. I just wanted to tell the galaxy that the council was trying to kill me. Now they look at me like I can save them." She looked at her hands. They were scarred from the razor reeds of Karen 9, stained with the grime of the underground. "I am not a leader. she whispered. I am just a loudmouth with a knife. Jonah turned to her. In the flickering light of a nearby neon sign, his face was tired but resolute. You think leadership is standing on a podium and shouting orders? He asked. That is what Vane does. That is what Kalen does. That is not leadership. That is management. He stepped closer, invading her personal space in that way that had become their default, a proximity born of survival. Leadership is feeding people what they need. Lyra, sometimes that is bread, sometimes that is truth. And right now, they need courage. They are starving for it, and you are the only one serving it. Lyra looked up at him. I am afraid, she admitted. Good, Jonah said. Fear means you are paying attention. The moment was shattered by a screech of static from a public terminal mounted on the wall. The screen, which had been displaying advertisements for synthetic joy sims, abruptly shifted to the Council's emergency broadcast seal. High Counselor Vane's face appeared. He looked composed, regretful, and terrifyingly calm. Citizens, Vane began. It is with heavy hearts that we announce a containment protocol. The terrorist cell operating out of the Karen system has released a biological pathogen. To protect the Concord, we have no choice but to sterilize the source. Lyra went cold. Fleet Command has been authorized to initiate Orbital Bombardment Protocol 7 Alpha on Karen 9. Vane continued. The planet will be burned to the bedrock. This is a tragic necessity to ensure our safety. The operation commences in 3 hours. The feed cut. Lyra stood frozen. The steam pipe behind her hissed, mocking the silence. They are going to burn it, she whispered. They are going to glass the planet. She wasn't thinking about the evidence. She wasn't thinking about the data cores. She was thinking of the river that glowed in the moonlight. She was thinking of the wind that sounded like laughter. She was thinking of Nib, waiting for her by the cave mouth. And then, the realization hit her. It struck her with the force of a physical blow, aligning all the scattered pieces of the last few months into a single, blinding picture. They are not just destroying evidence, she said, her voice rising. They are silencing a witness. Jonah looked at her, confused. The exiles? No, Lyra said, pacing the narrow alley. The planet. Jonah, don't you see? The taste memory compounds. The way the plants grew in patterns. The way the spores made us feel things. She stopped, grabbing his shoulders. It wasn't a side effect. It was a language. The biosphere is sentient. It knew it was being mined. It knew its children, the exiles, were being harvested. It was trying to scream for help, but it doesn't have a voice. It has flavor. It has chemistry. She looked at him with wild, bright eyes. I wasn't just cooking Jonah. I was translating every time I posted a recipe, every time someone ate that food and felt that fear or that love. It was the planet telling its story through me. She pulled away, her fear replaced by a cold, diamond-hard fury. They want to burn it because it is alive, and I am not going to let them. What do we do? Jonah asked. We can't fight a fleet. We are 2 people in a sewer. We don't fight with guns, Lyra said. We end the machine. We expose them so completely that no captain in the fleet will dare to push that button. She pulled out her data pad. We have the facility records. We have the names. But the Council's encryption is still blocking the main broadcast hubs. We need a key that unlocks everything. She looked at Jonah. I am going to cook one last dish. They found a secure terminal in the back of a shut-down tech repair shop, whose owner was a member of the Pantry Uprising. Lyra set up the camera. There were no props this time. No return bistro sign. No playful lighting. Just a gray wall and her face. She didn't try to hide the exhaustion. She didn't try to look like a noblewoman. She let the camera see the scar on her chin, the dirt in her hair, the fire in her eyes. Jonah stood behind the camera. "Ready?" he asked. Lyra nodded. "Record." The red light blinked on. "Hello?" she said. Her voice was quiet, stripped of the theatricality she had used as armor. "I am Lyra Soren, and I was never lost. I was erased." She held up the data core they had stolen from the facility for months. "You have watched me cook. You have laughed at my jokes. You have shared my recipes, but you haven't tasted the main course. Not yet." She leaned into the lens. "The council told you Karen 9 is a graveyard. They told you they need to burn it to save you. They are lying. Karen 9 is a witness. And tonight, it is going to testify." She looked down at the terminal. "I am uploading a final recipe. It is called the universal solvent. It is not food. It is a key. Hidden inside this file is the master encryption breaker for the council's archive." She looked up, her gaze piercing the lens. "When you download this, your screens will change. Your household feeds will change. You will see the names of the people in the tanks. You will see the orders signed by Vane. You will see the truth." She paused. "They want to burn the world to keep their secrets. I am asking you to set the truth on fire instead." She cut the feed. Jonah hit the upload key. The progress bar crawled forward. Uploading, 10%, 20%. It stopped. "Error. Carrier signal jammed. Local network lockout." Jonah cursed, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "They have locked down the local grid," he said. "The upload is blocked. We can't get the signal out from here. We need a high-gain transmitter." Lyra looked at the map on the wall. "The central comms tower," she said, pointing to the massive spire that dominated the district skyline. "That is a fortress," Jonah said. "It is guarded by the elite guard. We will never get near it." Lyra looked out the window at the streets below. The pantry uprising was already moving. She could hear the chants starting. "Storm fried, storm fried. We won't get near it alone," she said. She grabbed her cloak, but we are not alone. The riot was not a chaotic brawl. It was a synchronized wave of defiance. Thousands of people flooded the plaza surrounding the central comms tower. Chefs in white coats stood shoulder to shoulder with mechanics wielding wrenches. Street vendors threw smoke spice bombs, Lyra's recipe, creating clouds of choking aromatic fog that blinded the riot police. Lyra and Jonah moved through the center of the crowd. Hands reached out to touch them, to shield them. "Go, chef," a woman whispered, pressing a stun baton into Lyra's hand. "Make them eat it," a man roared, using his body to block a rubber bullet meant for Jonah. They reached the base of the tower. The blast doors were sealed, but Jonah clamped a decoder unit onto the panel. "Cover me," he shouted. High above, drones swooped down, firing containment foam and stun bolts. The crowd surged upward, throwing bottles, rocks, and debris, drawing the fire away from the door. The light on the panel turned green. The doors hissed open. Lyra and Jonah slipped inside, leaving the roar of the uprising behind them. The tower interior was a vertical shaft of silence and steel, rising 200 floors into the sky. "We need the transmission deck," Jonah said, checking the schematic. "Top floor." They ran for the service lift. It was disabled. "Stairs," Lyra said, heading for the emergency stairwell. 200 floors. Jonah groaned. "Think of it as cardio," Lyra said, kicking the door open. They climbed. They climbed until their lungs burned and their legs felt like lead. At the 50th floor, they encountered a patrol. Lyra didn't hesitate. She used the stun baton with the same precision she used a paring knife. She ducked under a swinging rifle, swept the guard's legs, and delivered a precise shock to the neural cluster at the base of his neck. Jonah provided cover fire with the blaster he had stolen, suppressing the other two guards until they could retreat to a higher level. By the time they reached the 150th floor, the alarm was blaring, a rhythmic, deafening pulse of red light and sound. They burst onto a catwalk suspended over the central cooling shaft. The air was thin here, cold and smelling of ozone. Above them, the transmission deck loomed. A squad of elite guards appeared on the balcony opposite them. "Stop them!" a commander shouted. Laser fire erupted, pinging off the metal grating of the catwalk. "Run!" Jonah yelled. They sprinted across the swaying bridge. A bolt sheared through the support cable. The catwalk lurched, dropping 3 feet. Lyra stumbled, nearly sliding off the edge into the abyss below. Jonah grabbed her hand. He pulled her back, his grip bruising. "I have you," he grunted, hauling her up. They reached the far door just as the catwalk collapsed completely, falling silently into the dark. They burst into the transmission deck. It was a circular room filled with banks of servers and a massive holographic projector in the center. Through the panoramic windows, the city of Exiled stretched out below, a grid of lights oblivious to the war being fought above it. Jonah ran to the main console. He jacked in the data core. "I am bypassing the firewalls," he said, his voice tight. "It will take 2 minutes." 2 minutes, Lyra repeated. She turned to the door they had just barricaded. She could hear the plasma cutters working on the metal. They stood there, in the eye of the storm. The alarms were muffled here. The city lights were beautiful. Lyra looked at Jonah. He was focused on the screen, sweat dripping from his nose, his hands steady despite the chaos. He had given up everything for her, his career, his safety, his anonymity. "Jonah," she said. He didn't look up. Almost there. Rerouting the signal to the orbital buoys. "Jonah, look at me." He stopped typing. He turned. They were close enough to touch. The air between them was charged with the electricity of the machines and the adrenaline of survival. Lyra reached out and touched his face. Her thumb traced the bruise on his cheekbone. "If this works," she said softly, "everything changes." "I know," he said. "If it doesn't work, we die." "I know." She looked at his lips. She wanted to kiss him. The urge was a physical ache, a hunger sharper than anything she had felt on the island. But she didn't. Instead, she rested her forehead against his. "You could have left me," she whispered. "In the pantry, in the shuttle, at the gala. You could have walked away." Jonah closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "No," he said. "I couldn't." "Why?" "Because you are the only real thing I have ever found," he whispered. "And I would rather die with you than live in the gray again." Lyra pulled back slightly, looking into his eyes. "Listen to me, Jonah Reyes. This isn't a debt. You don't owe me your life because I saved you from the razor reeds. I know. And I don't owe you mine because you hacked a door." "Then what is it?" Jonah asked, his voice raw. "It is a choice," Lyra said fiercely. "I am choosing you. Not because I have to. Not because we are the last 2 people left. But because I want to." She brushed her thumb over his lips. "Love isn't possession. Jonah, it isn't a transaction. It is just choosing the same person, over and over again, even when it costs you everything." The door behind them began to glow red hot. The sparks flew. "I choose you," Jonah said. Lyra smiled. It was a small, sad, perfect smile. Then finished the upload. "Chef," Jonah turned back to the console. He hit the final key. "Upload complete. Broadcast initiated." The signal went out. It hit the orbital buoys. It bounced to the relays. It flooded the data streams of the Orion Concorde. Every screen on the capital world went black for a microsecond. Then, the file opened. In living rooms, in bars, in the council chambers, in the cockpits of the battleships orbiting Charon 9, the truth appeared. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a manifesto. It was a recipe. Ingredients, truth, memory, evidence. And then the data flooded out. The videos of the harvest, the medical charts of the exiles, the financial records, the face of Lyra Soren, scarred and defiant, telling them that the planet was alive, in the orbit of Charon 9. Admiral Holloway sat on the bridge of the flagship Indomitable. His finger was hovering over the firing key for the orbital bombardment. His tactical screen flickered. A file opened. He saw the name on the list. Subject 8890, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Holloway, harvested, his sister. The sister he had been told died in a training accident. The Admiral stared at the screen. He stared at the planet below, swirling with its violet clouds. "Sir," the weapons officer asked. "Firing solution locked." "Orders?" Admiral Holloway slowly removed his hand from the console. He turned to the officer. "Belay that order, sir." "I said belay that order," Holloway roared. He keyed the fleet-wide channel. "This is Admiral Holloway to all ships. Stand down. Repeat. Stand down. We are not firing on Charon 9. Why, Admiral?" Vane's voice crackled over the comms, frantic and furious. "This is mutiny." "No, Counselor," Holloway said, his voice cold as the void. "This is evidence. If you want to burn that planet, you will have to burn through us first." One by one, the other ships in the fleet turned their weapons away from the planet and trained them on the capital relay beacons. The blockade was broken. The fall of the High Council was not a war. It was a collapse. Once the truth was out, the structure of lies that held the Concorde together disintegrated. Allied worlds withdrew their ambassadors. The trade guilds blockaded the capital. The elite guard, seeing the tide turn, laid down their weapons. Lyra and Jonah were found in the comms tower, not by executioners, but by a cheering crowd that carried them out on their shoulders. Vane and Kalen were arrested attempting to flee to the outer rim. They were found with cargo holds full of the harvested enzyme, evidence they couldn't eat fast enough to hide. The exiles were found, a fleet of rescue ships, led by the Pantry Uprising, landed on Charon 9. They breached the facility, they drained the tanks. Thousands of people, lost for years, woke up. They were weak, confused, and traumatized, but they were alive. 6 months later, the Great Hall of the Concorde was unrecognizable. The floating banners of the high houses were gone, replaced by simple flags representing the member worlds. Lyra Soren stood before the interim assembly. She wore a simple suit of gray silk. She looked tired, but the hunted look was gone from her eyes. The assembly had offered her the position of High Chancellor. They wanted a hero. They wanted a queen. Lyra stepped up to the podium. "No," she said. The assembly murmured. "You want to give me a throne." Lyra continued. "But thrones are just traps with velvet cushions. I did not fight to rule you, I fought to feed you." She looked at Jonah, who was sitting in the front row. He smiled, a small, private expression of pride. "I propose a new institution," Lyra said, "an exile tribunal to ensure every survivor is heard and compensated, and a humanitarian network built on shared resources. We start with food. No one in the Concorde goes hungry. No one is erased." She tapped the podium. "And as for Charon 9, it is off limits. It is not a mine. It is not a prison. It is a sovereign entity. We will listen to it, but we will never touch it again." She walked away from the podium, leaving the crown on the table. Later, on the balcony of the estate she had reclaimed, Lyra found Jonah looking out at the city. The lights were back on, but they were warmer now. The neon was less aggressive. "You turned it down," Jonah said. "The most powerful job in the galaxy." "I have a better job," Lyra said, leaning against the railing next to him. "I am a chef." Jonah looked down at his hands. "Lyra," he said softly. "The tribunal. They are going to investigate everyone who worked for the council, everyone who helped build the machine." Lyra looked at him. She knew what he was saying. "I was part of it," Jonah said. "I traced the signals. I wrote the code that hid the harvest. I didn't know what it was for, but I did it. I am complicit." He turned to face her. "When the trials start, you should distance yourself from me. You are the symbol of the revolution. You can't be seen with the man who helped build the cage." Lyra stared at him. The wind caught her hair, blowing it across her face. She reached out and took his hand. "Are you asking for forgiveness, Jonah?" "I don't think I deserve it." Lyra laughed softly. "Forgiveness isn't a prize, Jonah. You don't win it." She pulled him closer, until they were chest to chest, the heartbeat of the new world thrumming around them. "Forgiveness is a meal," she whispered. "It is messy. It is imperfect. It takes time to prepare, but it is meant to be shared." She kissed him. It was a kiss that tasted of everything they had survived. It tasted of the electric pepper and the storm-fried moss. It tasted of the fear in the breaker box and the silence in the tower. It was a claiming. "We fix it together," she said against his lips. "That is the sentence. Life without parole. With me." Jonah let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "I accept the terms," he whispered. "New blog post. The community table location. Sector 4, Relief Kitchen. Ethelgard. Status. Open." The final image of the story was not of a battle, or a speech, or a kiss. It was a photo, in the center of a crowded, chaotic kitchen. Huge pots of steaming broth were bubbling on industrial stoves. Strangers were sitting at long tables, humans, aliens, exiles, and soldiers, passing bowls of food, arguing about politics, laughing at jokes. In the background, standing in the doorway, were Lyra and Jonah. They were not looking at the camera. They were looking at each other. Their hands were brushing, fingers curled together in a loose, unbreakable grip. They were stepping forward, out of the frame, into the noise and the heat and the mess of the room. The caption below the photo was simple. "Survival is just the appetizer. The main course is what you feed to others. Bon appétit."